I was, I was blessed with an incredible father. So, I mean, I had a wonderful role model, but for whatever reason, I just was not at all aware of my values.
Sure.
And I just, I always thought like I didn't, I just kind of thought I was an average Joe. I knew I was really very disciplined, but I never considered like what I brought to the table. And then I kind of got into very weird relationship choices. And what kind of I think threw me a little bit, like granted I was young, I was in my early 20s. Right after my dad died, I got engaged, but it turned out to be to a professional confidence artist, and I had no idea about that.
Oh,
right.
wow.
So I had no idea that this. So I was real excited to have kids, start a family. I'm very excited. My dad passes, and then it turns out that it's all a show.
Hello, and welcome to the Renaissance of Men podcast. My name is Will Spencer. When I started this podcast in October 2020, I didn't expect to end up where I am today. I thought I'd be talking about men's transformations, their origin stories, and how those origin stories contributed to them becoming the men they are today. I wanted the podcast to document those stories, to encourage other men to start walking down their own paths of personal transformation, to have their own rebirth, to give themselves the opportunity to become the men they wanted to be. But capturing men's transformations is more difficult than I expected. Talking about masculinity, it's easy to be too invested in showing finished products, not works in progress, even if there's no such thing as a finished product of a man. None of this means, however, that I'm not deeply interested in men's transformations. The word Renaissance means rebirth, going from one state of being to another. A one-way trip, whether that be at the macro global or societal level, or the micro individual level. What we experience as men is just one small piece of our collective shift. Which brings me to my guest this week. His name is Jim Clair, and he's a writer. And that's it. He got his start in direct response copywriting, from which he's retired. Now he reads, thinks, writes, and works to surface the deceptions, flawed beliefs, and lies of the worlds through which he's traveled on his way to a better, fuller life. Maybe all this sounds familiar, like another man you know. And if you recognize the parallels, perhaps you'll also understand why this quickly became one of my personal favorite conversations of all time. In our conversation, Jim and I discussed Edward Gibbon's classic, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, why reading is an intimate conversation, Jim's powerful journey of transformation, calling out gurus and success polytheists, the limitations of ChatGPT versus human writing, the process of learning and unlearning, and finally, men cultivating taste and character. If you enjoy the Renaissance of Men podcast, thank you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment letting us know about your transformation. Also, share this episode with a friend so the Renaissance can reach more men and women. This podcast is sponsored by Reformation Coffee. Pastor Brandon Lansdowne has been roasting coffee in Springfield, Missouri for 15 years, and now he's working to bring his gifts to the world. Check out their 4 signature roasts and use the code SUBFREE to get 1 free bag of coffee with your monthly subscription. Visit reformationcoffee.com for more. And please welcome this week's guest on the podcast, a reader, writer, and thinker, Jim Clair. Hey, Jim, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on here. I'm really excited.
Excellent. Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to just jump right in because I've noticed that you're reading The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon lately. And I know that this is a series of books that a lot of people talk about, but I don't know that a lot of people read them. So I'm kind of curious to get your take on the book so far. You've been digging into them and how you see it mapping to our current moment. Cause I know that's a thing right now as well.
Yeah, it's, it's funny that you mentioned that how many people don't read that or how many people actually read that series. I tried Googling how many people a year read The Decline and Fall just to see if there was some sort of list, because I can't imagine people go through it, but it is clearly one of the most important books in the Western canon. As far as great books, I can see its influence. I mean, the first volume was written in 1776 and it didn't finish until something like 1789.
Wow.
From my understanding, and this could be a guesswork and I might be making a mischaracterization, I believe the founding fathers were reading it, or they were looking at it, because the Roman Empire was very important to them when they framed the government. And Gibbon's work, in the first volume published, it was a big hit. It was a big, very big hit in England, especially among Adam Smith, David Hume, Edmund Burke. But from what I understand, it was also a big hit abroad. I don't know how books from England got over during the, there was a little bit of that revolution thing going on. So,
yeah, it's kind of
but
busy
it
time.
is, it's funny, I was writing this morning, I got a lot of somewhat warnings about the book before I read it. And then, even looking around kind of before I read it, because I knew it was going to be an undertaking. I saw a lot of, like criticisms of it. I mean, not necessarily criticisms, but I guess what I call mischaracterizations of it. Some say it's anti-Christian. I don't find that. I think he's very even-handed in his approach. I could see how certain Christians, if you think that the Christianity has done absolutely no wrong in history, I can see that, but that's not really a fair assessment, right? Because man is tragic, and man, is running frameworks of religion, and so man's tragedy can't get out of his own way sometimes. But he's not anti-Christian. Some people said it's revisionist. My history nerd, or I was a history major in college, I don't sense so much revisionism. It's very philosophical. He goes very conceptual. He does go chronological. So it's a very deep work that covers just this vast, he covers like 1,500 years. So it's a vast work with a lot of things in it. But I can see the importance of that work.
So what was it that drew you to kind of read it? Because you said it was going to be an undertaking, which I understand that it is. Like, it's 1,000 pages, or maybe much longer than that. But it's a commitment. Did you go into it intending to read the whole thing, or like, maybe I'll just try the first book out and see how it goes?
Because I'm reading the Penguin edition of it, which they curated 6 volumes into 3 volumes. So Gibbon wrote 6 volumes, and Penguin has put it into 3 volumes. And I just trust Penguin classics. Usually their introductions are pretty good. You don't get so much, sometimes you get the super partisan type people who just kind of making their own, but Penguin's usually pretty good, and the translations are good. But obviously Gibbon wrote it in English. So I got that, and I've been reading more of the so-called great books, and I was planning on reading a little bit more. But when I ordered it in, I think June of last year, and I just kind of kept eyeing it. At that moment, I was reading a little bit more of, I kind of go down rabbit holes, and I was reading, Thomas Sowell, and he kind of pushed me over to Adam Smith. So I've been kind of hanging around a few Enlightenment thinkers. But one of my favorite writers of all time, one of my top 3 favorite writers, is Niall Ferguson, historian. And I absolutely love his writing, and I love his writing style. He's such a powerful and beautiful writer, and he reveres Gibbon. So when I was reading that, and I read Ferguson's Second World War book, I think it's called The War of the World. That kind of nudged me a little bit more in the direction to read, to take on Gibbon. And I am one of those people, I can only read one book at a time. I'm convinced someone who can read like 5 books at once is an alien. I know some people can do it, and it's fine. I've tried it. I just can't. I have such a hard time focusing with it. Like I just kind of lose my train of thought, because I start thinking about the other book and I want to finish. And then it's like, well, I can start a whole pile of books. So I knew it was going to take me a lot of time. It's something like 3,000 or 3,300 pages around there total. Wow. And the introduction to it, which is fantastic, by this historian named David Wormsley, I think is his name, it's about 120 pages or so, something like that. That's fantastic on its own. And it's really, even just to read that. But I knew I wanted to read it. I kind of expected a slog. So I kind of said, all right, I'll read it for the winter. It's going to take me a few months. I like, I'm working on reading it slowly, but I kind of somewhat expected like boring parts that I would just kind of hammer my way through a little bit. But Yeah, when I got into it, man, it is just so good. It's just the writing is incredible. It's clearly, in my opinion, maybe one of the greatest nonfictions ever written as far as writing style and writing prose. I mean, Gibbon's writing is just, it's otherworldly. I mean, it's just on a completely different level. Its beauty, its style, its rhetorical flourishes, how he unpacks arguments. And plus he has a lot of turns of phrases, and he can be very funny. He uses a lot of irony and satire, and then he'll just kind of stack up. Well, it seems like he's painting up like some beautiful virtue, and then he just does this complete twist of phrase, to kind of give this little dig at something. So it's really funny how he can do that. And that makes it very readable, but it also makes it all the deeper themes makes it a lot more easier to grasp, I guess you could say.
See, this is great because I know that you're a writer, and I saw that you tweeted recently about reading comprehension or retaining the things that you read. And so I've got Calvin's Institutes up on my bookshelf, and that's 1,000 pages. So this is all really relevant for me because, like, how do I tackle a giant work like that? What kind of mindset? How do I retain what I read? How do I approach? Because a lot of these, like the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, there are massive volumes that have been so influential to our culture, but a lot of people, they look at them as like, it's too much, I could never read that. People look at Moby Dick, for example, which is an absolutely worthwhile read, but they consider that really challenging, and that's 500 pages or something like that. So to approach something that's like 3,000 pages, and that's as influential, to our history as a culture, I think it can be intimidating unless men know how to approach it, and then they know what to do with it. So you've read it. Congratulations. You've read Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Well, what do you do with it? Are you engaged with it? Are you there with it? And I think this is where a lot of men are recognizing, like, well, if we're going to begin rebuilding some semblance of Western civilization, excuse me, how are we going to go back to approaching the books that are so outside of our ability, our perceived ability to read? So all that makes sense, because I think men are looking for something. They're hungry for something that informed who they were the day before yesterday, metaphorically speaking. And so there's maybe some intimidation approaching these things. Go ahead.
Right. I mean, well, there's a lot there. And I mean, that's a lot of also what I think about, and kind of even where more my, my site, my writing is going, is that I think reading has been, from multiple levels, from multiple sides, even though it's been well-intentioned, it's been vulgarized and bastardized kind of into a life hack of sorts.
Yeah.
You have on one end, you have kind of the hustle bros or the hustle gurus, telling you to read the 9 books every man should read before they turn 50 or 30 or 100 or something like that, or the 9 books to read if you want to be a success, or some guy saying, I read 6,000 books on X, all were a waste but these 3. And then the whole thing is this idea that you're going to read these particular sets of books or read this particular book, and somehow it's going to provide you some sort of lift. I mean, yeah, books do offer a huge benefit and huge insight, but if you're just kind of treating it like, oh, it's just going to be this holy grail, I'm just going to sit and download the information, then I level myself up. Or if I'm going to write down, that doesn't do anything. It doesn't engage you, the reader, as well-intentioned as it is. And the other aspect I notice is there's this constant fear and anxiety to seek the lessons or to remember what you read. So we get these really, and again, that is well-intentioned, it's directionally right, but it gets very quick into, you're not engaging the critical thinking, right? You either, if you're more in the professional success, or what I call a capital S success world, you start looking for the income secrets in every single book you read. It doesn't matter if it's David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me or if it's A Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. You force both books into the same lens. And generally, you're trying to force The Decline and Fall into the lens of a Can't Hurt Me, which Can't Hurt Me is a little bit more, the Goggins book is a little bit more of a motivational book, right? It's not quite an autobiography, but it's much more a book on mindset. And it's written to a particular crowd. And that's not necessarily a knock on the book, but it's not the weight and substance of Decline and Fall. So a lot of people will take these books and try to turn it into that by finding the lessons. So they seek the income secrets, or they seek the copy secrets. And I fell prey to myself to that years ago. And the other part's trying to remember things, right? We get this whole thing of I'm going to remember it, I'm going to remember it, I'm going to remember it. So you have the second brain, the digital Kindle, the library. I'm going to upload it. I'm going to do this Anki thing. I'm going to do this Ryan Holiday note-taking system. Then I'm going to upload it to this. But it doesn't bring you to the book, right? You're just kind of looking for nuggets that you're trying to pass this quiz that you're not really ever going to be taking. So I think there is this, and there's a speed element to it of wanting to have read, right? Not versus engaged. You got to do this really quickly, right? You got to get these 9 books, right? So there's this speed element to it. So you kind of just rush through this thing. And I think who was a big influence on my reading was this Mortimer Adler, How to Read a Book, which is at times very snobby. And I think at times he's a little bit moralizing at times. But what I like a lot about him is you're working to leave the book on the same intellectual footing as the author. It's not to say you're going to get there, right? I can't pretend I'm going to leave Edward Gibbon on the same page as Gibbon, or I'm not going to leave Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle on Aristotle's page, but I'm trying to engage with it in a conversation to try to get there, right? So I'm asking a ton of questions. And I noticed lately I've been doing a lot more marginality where I'm asking questions. I don't necessarily try to seek the answers always, but my marginality is a lot of questions. Like, oh, is this like this? Is this like this? So I'm thinking that I'm in the room with the author. I'm like, oh, is it like this? Is it like that? Maybe it's like this. And then also, I'll make observations and things like that. So I think that's a much better way, better way to kind of engage with these books that can swim up, that can be tough to tackle. And I think there are ways to get into books like Gibbon. Is not just going to grab Gibbon and like, I'm just going to read this on a flight. I think certain books require a little bit of consideration to get to it. And I think it's worthwhile to do that.
This is all really helpful for me because this is a question that I've been sitting with recently. I just finished the book Libido Dominandi by E. Michael Jones. It's about 600 pages, small print, incredibly dense book about essentially the history of the sexual revolution going back to the French Revolution and coming up until roughly 2000. So it was written 20 or so years ago. And so there was so much in this book. And I feel that I did walk away from the book on the same intellectual footing as far as the book is concerned as E. Michael Jones. Obviously not going to the same, as you say, not on the same level of like Aristotle, like reaching that level, but familiar with understanding his logic. And so I wanted to move forward into more books. And I was confronted with the YouTube suggestion of Ryan Holiday's note-taking system. And I was like, should I be doing that? Because I'd never considered it before. And I tried it with a book for one of my upcoming guests. And I just found that note-taking system to be excruciating. Like I would sit and write down the thing on a note card. And I was like, 5 hours later, you know what I mean, in my messy handwriting. And so it sort of has me reflecting on, okay, what is the right way to go about thoughtfully engaging with these books without treating it like a job? Like I want to enjoy the books I read. This is not a there's a quiz. There's no quiz. There's a quiz that's never going to come. But how do I make sure to engage thoughtfully with the things that I'm reading so that I'm changed by it and that I don't treat it casually?
Yeah, I think, what has helped me is, and again, and a lot of it ties back to Adler, and I'll also have to give some credit to, I read it more recently, Alan Jacobs, is it the Reading in an Age of Distraction? His second book I'm glad I read it, but it turned into more of an argument with him at times, which is a good thing with the reading. And what I'm, that comes back to, Adler has this aspect of, I think one of the toughest, or this question of when you're reading it, is it true or is it false? Yes or no, and how true or false is it? And he wants you to answer with granular answers, right? Because it's real easy to pick up a book that you don't like and just, it's stupid because it's woke or it's not woke enough. Like, so it's easy to have these knee-jerk reactions, or it's easy to have these platitude responses to it. But how can you reason with the author if you agree or disagree especially on disagree? If you disagree with the author, how can you say your reasons or state your reasons in a way that he or she would understand. You may completely agree to disagree. And you may even have to be radically honest of like, look, he may be right empirically, but I just don't like it. And you have to be honest with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's just the way it is. Sorry, my cat loves making appearances.
They do that.
Yeah. And he likes moving things around. But how can you, if you agree with it, why would you agree with it? Not just a knee-jerk agree like, oh, because it fits my worldview, this is right. How can you do that? And if you start doing that at first, it can be really, it can be kind of tough at times because you realize you answer with really is like a platitude or a chestnut. Oh, it's great because it's XYZ. It's like, well, that's not really an answer. But how can you get a more grounded, granular answer? I find that starts kind of elevating the conversation a little bit because you have to be very honest with yourself. If you say it's 80% true and 20% false, okay, well, what's the 20% false? And if you treat it as, okay, if I'm telling Thomas Sowell that he's 20% wrong here, how am I going to do that to a way where maybe he's not going to agree with me, but how is he going to be doing it to a way where it's like, okay, well, I can accept that. I don't agree with it, but I can accept that. That takes a little bit of work, I think. And it's very, you have to be very honest with it. When it comes back to notes, yeah, because I tried, it's funny you mentioned Ryan Holiday's systems. I tried that myself and I had containers full of commonplace methods. And that's great if a commonplace method works for you, but I find it is a little bit, you read it and then you got to write the notes and then you put it away and then you try to store it in like mindset or other things. It just gets kind of hectic. I find, when you're asking, when you have questions before you read them, and when you're taking marginalia or if you're taking notes as you're doing it, and I find if those notes are much more conversational, where you're not just trying to write down the lesson or the something to remember, but you're trying to press an observation or press back on an argument or press back on a question. I find that kind of gets you engaged a little bit more.
So this is maybe somehow also a little different from like, what question is not being asked? Because sometimes in reading, particularly nonfiction books, I understand that the author is putting a perspective forward that they've obviously invested a ton of time, money, and energy to craft. And sometimes I'll read nonfiction books and I will find myself wondering what argument that I am not aware of has been excluded from this because it might undermine the point the author is making. Right. I sometimes find myself going into that place.
Yeah. That's the thing you got to make it. I think it's great when it's personal like that. When you start saying, or something just along the lines you said, or you're asking, okay, he's saying this, but as opposed to what?
Right.
And being honest with it. And it's like, well, maybe he is right or something. Like I said, that Alan Jacobs book I read, which was, the first one was great because it talks about slowing down and having marginality. And he really does a great job of detailing the issues with modern reading. But the second one, in my opinion, it was clear that he's way too stuck in his academic faculty lounge. So he makes great points, but then he's pushing certain things through fourth wave, feminism, or he's pushing certain things of, he's not quite critical race theory, but he praises, someone like Frederick Douglass and why it's important to read Douglass to have difficult conversations on race, which is absolutely true. But then he kind of castigates Douglass, or he says, I can't understand how Douglass can say the founding fathers are great, even though they're flawed when America is such an oppressive place. So it's like, what do you mean? But I actually enjoyed having the argument with him in that moment because I think he's a good writer. But you have to be honest when it's like, okay, I'm about to call him out. I can't just throw Twitter snark at him or something. How am I going to call him out, right? And that is where that conversationless questions can really, I think, take reading to a better level versus just trying to remember things. And then if your notes are like that, and if you're asking questions like that, or if you're saying things like that, even if you get snarky, but you can back it up a little bit. That's where it kind of gets a little bit more one-on-one conversation. Because for most of us, there's no real test that we have to take. Like, okay,
Right.
who was Alaric in Rome and what did he do? There's no like test, I think that's kind of the way to kind of get us engaging in that world of ideas, especially with nonfiction books.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Say more about conversationless questions. Did I catch that phrase correctly? Is that like a question that you're asking the author that the author isn't necessarily there or available to answer, that you allow the book to answer for you or not?
Yeah, so it's much more. I mean, I always like reading as an intimate conversation, and I might have taken that from Adler, or I just might have formed my own. But I really do believe that reading is an intimate conversation, and it's between you and that author. Especially nonfiction books. I think fiction is similar, just works a little bit differently depending what kind of fiction you're reading. But for nonfiction, I view it as you are in the room with that author. And it's you in one-on-one with that author, and you can ask that author any question you like. And the question Adler puts out, or the questions that I have somewhat evolved from Adler, are what I'm looking for when I'm reading is what's it about on a whole, what's being said in detail, and how. Is it true or false, and in part or in whole, and why? What of it, and what of it is kind of, where does it stand in the grand scheme of ideas? And then I like to say, what lessons can I walk away with? But for me, when I'm reading that, I'm not just trying to stick to those particular questions. So I will go with the marginalia neither. Sorry, I get excited about this, as you can tell. So neither am I trying. So I'm not trying to just stick to those questions. And when I'm reading it, I'm not just trying to write down the lessons or write down all the platitude sayings, because it is in any book you can find cool mindset type quotes. You can take any pithy sentence, like, oh, this is it. But that removes a context, right? It's great that quote is there, and that's cool. But you want to be you want to be conversing with the overall argument of the book, or you want to be engaging with a story. I mean, the Decline and Fall is 3,000 pages. It's tough to just kind of be engaging on one thing. There's so much to engage with. But that's where you want to allow yourself to ask questions, to press back, or if you're making observations. Like I had, one observation, like the reign of Julian. I'm like, is this akin to? And I think I asked a question: is the reign of Julian, everything that he's laying out, is this like the current Biden administration left-wing establishment? How are they working to undermine? And Gibbons never going to answer that, right? He died close to 300 years ago. Like he's never going to answer that. But it's just a question in my mind where, it's just something for me to chew on personally. And it might not be like that. It might, but that's a question where I kind of can remember that. And then also, I'll take notes where it's like, it's not, where I'm saying like it's in that book, it's like, he's not anti-Christian. Maybe there's a pejorative here or there, but he's, showing a relatively new religion that started having division really quickly with each other, going into a world full of division. And, there's kind of this perfect storm of no one's really getting along. Everything is getting very atomized. So it's kind of like, oh, everyone said this. Well, this isn't true, right? So, and that's what I'm seeing. So when that pops up for me, that's just the observation I'm making. So it's a more personal observation. So it's that kind of thing of whatever surfaces in with the book, and then as if you have that author there to converse with. And that is maybe you're looking for answers for today, or maybe you're just asking questions on what's going on there, or making observations on, oh, this is just like XYZ in my life.
This is all super helpful for me, because there's this confusion around the phrase read a book. So I like to joke that people don't know how to read anymore. Like, obviously we know how to read words on a page. We know how to read words on a screen. We're all literate. But knowing how to read words on a screen is not the same thing as knowing how to read. Like, you sit down and you read a book. That process of shutting off the world, turning on a light, and opening a book. And a book is not the same thing as the information in a book. So like, I can download a book onto my Kindle, right? That's just a bunch of information I've downloaded. It's not the same thing as as a book. This is just one that I have handy, The Occult History of Feminism. Very interesting book. So it's like, this is a book, right? But a book is not the same thing as the physical book is not the same thing as the information that I download onto a Kindle. And the process of being literate is not the same thing as knowing how to read. And so I try to like how to read a book. So I try to draw these fine distinctions of wanting to encourage men to read more books in print, to engage with them, and to really take them in, not as content, right, but as nourishment for the heart and the spirit and the soul, really. And so I think this is hugely relevant for men who are wanting to turn off all the different sources of stimulation and actually take in something that, a book really has the possibility to transform a being. It happens all the time. But how do we allow that to happen these days? Right.
I mean, I think that's a great point of the nourishment. And I think on one end to the transformation, which I have experienced myself multiple times through reading, is you can't quite go in looking for it. I think there's this element here today of, like if you look at airport bestsellers, it's all about the transformation and optimization. So people go in looking for this kind of thing. And the problem is that you can try to, like if you read a lot of Ryan Holiday, then you'll take his books and you try to turn everything into to his version of Stoicism. Right. And so you kind of push everything through that lens. And then the other aspect of it is, you can read the books to transform your life, which is true. But if you go in trying to make it do that, that's when I find readers will get into hunting pithy sentences that can serve their worldview. I mean, you can find that in any book, right? Like you can go to Karl Marx Capital and find like, here's this mindset thing. Like it's there if you want it, right? But that's not really what he's saying in that book, obviously. Right. And the same thing with Edmund Burke, right? I mean, you do the same thing, but that's not really what he's quite saying. So, but if you go
10 killer mindset quotes.
It's
a great Twitter thread.
Yeah, get the Karl Marx Capital mindset, bro. Change the world, literally.
Buy my course on Gumroad.
How to get your ideas spread. But if you go in just having that intimate conversation and realizing things might fly over your head, that's okay. That I find that engagement is what's going to pull you up into that world of ideas, and pull you into that argument that's going on. And then in that moment when you're taking your time, that's where you might read things that really, really resonate, that can really move a needle for you. On whatever that may be. It might be directly said in the book. It might not be directly said in the book, but there's something about it that suddenly grounds your world view a little bit, or opens you up to a worldview, or that shows you a different way. And it's something that you feel natural and right and almost instinctual to you that you can do. And it may take time to get there, but there's something about it that really, really resonates with you. And I think, versus just trying to versus sitting there being like, just give it to me, just give me that idea, isn't really doing it right. Lift yourself up. And that sounds like a platitude, but you want to, you're in a room with the author, have the conversation with him, and then see how you feel after it or during it. Like that, I think that's going to lead to that beneficial insight.
So there are a couple different directions I want to take this, and we'll do whichever one first that you prefer. So first, I'd like to hear about books that you've read lately or throughout your life that have created that transformation for you, maybe that you weren't looking for. And then another book, because I read your email about this, that you read recently that it sounds like you were arguing with author the entire time, was Yuval Noah Harari. And he's a favorite punching bag as well. So, on one hand, you have the transformation book where it's like, wow, I got so much more than I expected from this. On the other hand, it's like, man, I just want to punch this book in the nose, I suppose. So whichever one you want to run with first, then we'll do the other one.
I'll go with the transformation book.
Okay.
And it's been a few different books. I could say that the more bigger transformations probably started happening, what I used to do in direct marketing, the copywriting, the kind of the scammy world. There was a couple of things that started kind of kicking me out of that. Oddly enough, The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler, Marlowe's character was, and that's the thing, I didn't expect him to be a wake up call to me. But it's like, geez, this guy is just so, he's not an Eagle Scout, but he has his moral compass, and he's unapologetic about himself. As much of as a wise ass as he is, he's aware of his flaws, but he knows he's sensitive, not sensitive in the sense of crying or something, but he's sensitive to how people work. He's very choosy about who he decides to open up with, man or woman, and whatever the level of the relationship is. He's sensitive in that manner. That kind of moved me a little bit. And then it was of all people, there was a passage by Arthur Schopenhauer. I remember when I read that passage, I went on a walk for like hours.
Wow.
And it was about if you inherit money, it's not a curse. So when I was scrambling a lot in internet marketing, because my dad ran an automotive empire, and then I was working in it, and I thought my whole life that this is what I was going to do. And it sold, and then he died of cancer. And for whatever reason, I had this crazy idea that I had to beat his money mark. And that kind of led to this relatively unhealthy internal scramble. It was great because it provided a good work ethic and motivation, but I was really trying to beat this money mark. And I thought anything that he gifted to me was some sort of curse, and then I had to beat it. And it was a very unhealthy view of it. And when I was kind of getting out of this crazy world of internet marketing, and I read this thing by Arthur Schopenhauer if you can take your purpose, and if you have a gift of finances behind it, you can do great good in the world. Yeah. It's a very long passage, and I was like, oh my, and like the hair rose in my arms. And I read it over and over and over and over again, because my mind, it's how it works. I can get stuck on something. And I just went for a walk. It was like a gray day out here in Denver, pretty cold. And I just walked for hours thinking on that passage. Becoming more recently, and I think a big shift that I didn't quite expect was Edmund Burke's The Reflections on the Revolution of France. So Edmund Burke I got really very curious on my worldview, because I thought, I was like, okay, I figure I'm probably more conservative, but I've never looked at it. Right. I went atheist because after my dad passed, the priest said that $500,000 would get him into heaven. And I was like, come on.
What?
Doing,
you take checks.
So I was like, I'm atheist, right? So I had a knee jerk reaction. Yeah. So I kind of got to a place where I'm like, I've never really looked into this. Right. I just went a knee jerk reaction on faith. And I didn't really ever question it. So I kind of went into it, and I read the more left-leaning authors and stuff. I said, well, this is interesting, but it's not connecting with me, right? I looked at the political philosophy. I looked at, read Dawkins and stuff. I was like, it just doesn't quite connect with me. Even that the well-argued guys, I found some of the atheist people I just found so smug. The only ones I didn't find, I actually like some of A.C. Grayling. But I just still found that when he came down to arguments, I'm like, oh, that's a little smug, he has a cool book on the choice of Hercules or something like that, which is, but it didn't connect. So I read Edmund Burke, because I said, all right, I'm tired of the more left-leaning views. I'm going to look at the conservative views. And, everyone says Edmund Burke is the kind of conservative godfather, or the kind of the conservative OG, as the kids say on Twitter these days. And that was a huge shift on my worldview, even as far as I was looking for in a romantic relationship with a woman. That was a massive shift. And I didn't expect that, right? Because it's Reflections on the French Revolution is more of a satirical work where he's, just showing all of the issues, and he's making all of these predictions of what's going to happen with the French Revolution. It was absolutely right. I don't think he expected to be laying out a political framework that has shaped one party in America for the last however many years, and but his way he looked at people and society, that really intrigued me. And then I read his thing on, which I think was somewhat of a love letter to his wife. I know the early feminists hated it, but intellect and beauty. And I was like, geez, he just is so aware of his values. That really shifted things for me. And that led me to Thomas Sowell, which was another big change for me. So to me, what it was, and conflict of visions is really big, is getting grounded in my worldviews. Being this, okay, I'm, as far as Thomas Sowell says, I'm in the constrained worldview, which is generally conservative. And obviously there's a huge spectrum of conservative views, from, standard republicanism to libertarianism to, there's out like the neo-monarchy type crowds out there. So there's a spectrum. I said, okay, well, I'm definitely in that camp. Right. And then kind of getting grounded in that and made me way more aware of my values. Because I think beforehand, after my dad had passed, and then even before, when I was working for him, I wasn't quite aware of the political games I was somewhat involved in with his his right-hand people. Right. Because, his kid is here. And so we have to, what are we going to do? And I was there to work hard. And, so it was kind of like, I didn't see that I was getting caught up on things. So for a while, I was very, very unaware of my values. And I didn't even question what I brought to the table, as far as, especially in romantic relationships. I never thought, I was like, I'm just average Joe, just bring this to the table. Right. I never like, it flew way over my head. But then when Burke, just whatever reason, he just opened a lot to me. He even opened, like, I'm like, I know Burke's in it, I'm like, I wonder, Burke on faith is pretty good here. He isn't, quite a theologian, but it's an interesting argument here. So that kind of shifted me out of atheism. And it's kind of this shift into like, well, pantheism kind of makes sense. I might have been reading the Stoics, but now it's like, oh, okay, well, Christian deism makes a lot of sense to me. So it's kind of this unique shift where but that has been important too in finding my values and being more grounded. So Burke, Sowell, Schopenhauer, those would be the big. And then Raymond Chandler's Philip Marlowe. Those would be the big shifts.
Excellent. Well, may I ask some questions about this? Because I'm super curious.
Yes.
If you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
So how far this is everything that I'm about. Like, I think we all as men at various points in our lives are called to change our views, or to ask hard questions of ourselves, or to discard the old answers in favor of new ones as times around us change, or as we change, or as crisis comes in. Like, this process of self-recreation is so fundamental to being a man. And a lot of men at various stages in their lives will be called to that process of self-transformation, and will either heed the call or fail in the call. And I think this is what Joseph Campbell is really talking about with the hero's journey, is that it's not necessarily some outward call into some literal forest. It can be a call into ourselves, like going into the dark places within ourselves, not dark as in wicked, but dark as in unlit, and saying, well, what are my values really? And that takes courage to kind of go in there. So I'm curious, since you mentioned it, because I think it's such an important thing for men, how far into this process are you, and when did this kind of start?
You mean on my journey on values, or the?
Yeah, like when you picked up Burke and was like, or when you encountered the Schopenhauer quote, for example.
I would definitely call myself a late bloomer.
Same.
But it came relatively quickly. But even when it comes quickly like that, it's kind of a little bit trippy. It's like, is this really happening?
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
it's kind of like, how the heck did I not notice this? But like, how did I not notice this before? And then, you have like close friends. Well, I told you that like 20 years ago. I'm like, well, I know, but
you didn't mean it.
For me, to really open up, there was, I was blessed with an incredible father. So, I mean, I had a wonderful role model, but for whatever reason, I just was not at all aware of my values. Sure. And I just, I always thought like I didn't, I just kind of thought I was an average Joe. I knew I was really very disciplined, but I never considered like what I brought to the table. And then I kind of got into very weird relationship choices. And what kind of, I think, threw me a little bit, like, granted, I was young, I was in my early 20s. Right after my dad died, I got engaged, but it turned out to be to a professional confidence artist. And I had no idea about that.
Oh,
right.
Wow.
So I had no idea that I was real excited to have kids, start a family. I'm very excited. My dad passes, and then it turns out that that's all a show. So, and that kind of threw my world upside down a little bit. And then then the kind of what I said before, I read the Schopenhauer thing, I was kind of in this bizarre scramble of trying to find, like, I got to beat this money mark. So I moved from Boston to Denver, and I just kind of I just wasn't aware of my values at all. I just thought average Joe. Then, when I was working in that sort of, that scammy part of direct marketing, I started off in the seduction space, and I went over to health and weight loss. I was like, I just felt so off. I felt in spiritual limbo, even though the money was fantastic. I was making a ton of money. And I was like, man, I might be able to, I was delusional thinking I was going to beat the money mark of a automotive empire of like 22 car dealerships from 17 brands. But I was in my mind, like, I can do this with copy. I was making, I was making a superb amount of money, but it's kind of like, I missed the fact that, okay, this is, it's like, but I kind of started realizing this is a different beast. Yes, I'm doing great as it is. And, but I was in spiritual limbo, right? I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. And, I was kind of tumbling. I was kind of reaching, right? I was kind of reaching and tumbling towards, there's got to be something better, or there's got to be something. And I've always kind of had that thing. And sometimes that has led to a scramble. But then when it was really 2020 that I just became suddenly very aware of my values. And I have to give, it was just, I started listening to my friends a little bit, or, because I always brushed off a compliment. And even if it came from a woman, it's like, oh, you're a good looking guy. I was like, oh, they all say that. But I wasn't like self-defeating, like I'm an ego. I'm like, I just thought that's like social tact, So I was kind of like not self-aware of that. And then someone said, yeah, have you ever considered what you bring to the table? I was like, what? What it was? So that simple question in that moment really kind of made me aware of it. And then when I read Burke and just kind of saw this, I realized I'd kind of moved away from things that I think I was a little bit closer to. And I have no regrets for that. Like, I think it's a maturation process for sure. But I moved away from things. And then I was like, geez, I do bring something to the table. And again, and I'm saying all this, I wasn't like this unconfident, like, oh man, I don't bring anything to the table. It was just, I was just very oblivious to it. And then when that sort of hit, and then when, Burke sort of hit with opening up my worldviews, and then, I was reading a lot of Stoicism at the time, and I do like the Stoics, but, Burke kind of, with Aristotle and everything, it just sort of like it just sort of stoked the fire a little bit. And And when I was aware of my values, it just completely changed everything. I was way more confident in what I was saying and being way more unapologetic. And I don't think there was a huge difference in behavior, but there was something where I was just a little bit more sure and self-aware of myself. And what I was, I guess, in the presence I was bringing or something like that, where it's, something I just didn't think of that before. I'm like, I'm just some guy here. Right. Where now it's like, okay, well, here, now I'm like, here's who I am and here's what I offer. And it's not, some things I still question because those values came late, but it's like, no, that's, I'm going to go with it. I'm just going to go with it.
I think that's great. I think a lot of men resist defining their values consciously, because as soon as you define your values by choice, you're forced to take a defined shape. This is who I am. This is what I believe. And when you actually know that for sure, to a relatively high degree, you will, as a man or as a person, naturally encounter others who believe different things and consciously know. And so you take a shape and you invite conflict at the same time. And a lot of men just don't want to do that, right? They just don't want to. They don't want to like lock into actually a form of being, because it's easier to just not really take a shape and just flow through situations versus like, no, this is who I am. This is what I believe, and this is what I'm about.
Right.
Because some people
it's easy to try to get like a framework of, I was, in the seduction space, a framework of game, or a framework of, or even the success, the business world, framework of networking tactics, or framework of this, or framework of that. You really end up subjugating or subordinating your faculties or your will, thinking you need this framework to go do it all. Not that all of these frameworks are necessarily bad, right? They can help on some element or some way. But it's like you look for this kind of framework to do it for you, versus bringing yourself to the table.
So this helps me understand a lot of the tweets that you write, which are against the sort of direct marketing kind of scammy copywriting bit. Like I remember you were writing a bit about that when I first encountered. It's like, oh, I appreciate it. No, I appreciate you taking a real strong stance against deceptive marketing tactics. And there's a lot of that out there. And I do the same now. Like, I'm just like, look, I'm just not okay with some of the values that I'm seeing propagated in lots of ways, particularly around the seduction space, particularly today, in 2023, America, 2023, the West. Like you look at the Burke book, from what happened in the French Revolution and that whole thing propagating forward to today. Like, we can now say that these things are not, certain behaviors are not okay. We have to say that they're not okay. And so that explains that transformation process, why you're going hard at the marketing, because there's a lot of scamming in that world as well. So that helps me understand where kind of what's inspiring that. Like it's a value. It sounds like it's a values based thing. It's professional. Like this is crap. Stop doing that because you make us all look bad. But for you, it seems like it's coming from a deeper place.
No, for sure. Because there's so much scammy stuff out there, and there's just so much misinformation. Like with well-meaning people. I was just, I don't know if I felt bad or not. I don't know if you saw, like, Alexander Cortez posted something about intermittent fasting. He's a big personality. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I'm and he's right. It's a tool to easily reduce calories. Right. But then in his replies, it's all like these marketing claims where people are taking a science. Man, I remember writing those darn claims. Like selling a fasting program that's anti-aging, and it's like, my God, like it's well-meaning people sometimes when they do it, they don't know how to do it. So it's good that people press back on that. But yeah, boy, does it wade into very unethical things, and it's tricky because some people mean well and they're writing the most unethical stuff, but they're just not aware that they're doing it. That they're propagating and spreading all of this kind of nonsense to get people to take an action, and they're really weakening their own selves when they probably could be doing a lot better. But they just get on this conversion train. I have a whole theory that the success world is like its own religion. It's like a polytheism of sorts.
Go for it. I'm super curious.
Yeah. So the world of, or what I call capital S success is, that would entail basically professional and personal self-development. And usually it's, for some form of, better income, more funnels, better mindset kind of things. You have everything from the Tony Robbins world to even to the more, as I've seen some of your messages, to the more new age sort of world, to anything what you see on what you would call, how to make 10,000, quit your 9 to 5 and make $1 million in 1 month type things. So, it's an expansive world, but I think there is, it's a polytheism of sorts, because things like conversions, attention, funnels, income, revenue, they become this sort of, they become this own deity, right? There's not one particular deity, but there's multiple deities, the ones of conversions or the one of attention. And it kind of becomes, everything is either has to be done for that cause or to attain that, or everything is being done through that. So you kind of like a small example of it would be if someone is going viral for all the wrong reasons, right? Like the guy says something very, who knows what it is, right? He says something really dumb, or he says something that's really racist, or he says something that's really whatever, just bad or stupid. And everyone's like,
right.
Oh no, dude, he did this for attention. Like, look at all, like, you guys are complaining, but he's the one getting the attention here. Like, this is
engagement,
great,
bro.
Yeah. And it's like, all attention is good attention. Like, that's kind of like one of those deities. Like, oh my God, this guy is great. Like, I think there was right during the pandemic, there was some idiot guru who posted something like, if you don't come out of this pandemic, learning 3 new skills or something like that, you're a loser. And it went viral, right? I think even J.K. Rowling mentioned it, right? But I think the kid was well-meaning, right? But it is kind of like, right, if all of these jobs, and he tweeted it right at the time when people are getting, like restaurant workers are losing their jobs. So, if a family of 5, and their parents are both, in the restaurant industry, or wherever the restaurant they're in doesn't have really good delivery, all of a sudden they have to be worrying about feeding their kids. Mm-hmm. Coming out of it, learning how to speak French, or learning a new income secret skill like public speaking, that sounds very condescending and trite, right?
Yeah.
But he's sitting there like, oh, I'm getting all this engagement, bro. It's like, yeah. And people are like, wow, how'd you do this? It's like, no, you see, he's getting engaged for all the wrong reasons, right? Because if you move that argument over and you say, Jeff Epstein gets a lot of engagement, well, not exactly for the right reasons, right? Like, he's not getting good attention, but they don't understand that. So they think that this is really great engagement, right? I mean, I get it too. Like, there's this, if I criticize someone, right? Like, I've criticized like Alex Hormozy, because it's very unclear to me as to what he does. If I criticize him, it's like, oh, bro, you're doing contrarian take, nice engagement tactic.
Cloud chasing, bro.
I'm not doing a contrarian take for an engagement tactic to push my newsletter or something like that, right? That I find something off with what's going on, and I may or may not be wrong, but I'm going to stand up and say something about it. So there's this weird element there. Then also there's this odd element of you can't criticize anything. So that's kind of this religious zealot aspect of success. So you mentioned that the Sapiens thing, like, if you criticize, like that, the guy who I criticized in that article, his name's Nat Eliason, and I wasn't necessarily going after him. He was I was using him as an avatar for things I've seen about Sapiens, especially in the success world. But you can't say anything bad about it. It's life-changing. Is that if you call something bad, it's because you have psychological issues, you're a hater, you're jealous, you're this, you're that. There's this instant trained knee-jerk reaction. He accused me of having psychological issues to go get help because I criticized something, right? And it's it's incredible how powerful this is. Like, even when I call out, scammy copywriters, they just say I'm a hater who's a poor broke loser. So they immediately they immediately cast you as a sinner, but not just a sinner, but something that needs like persecution. Like you're a poor broke loser. Like, so like everyone who criticizes, if you criticize Grant Cardone, you're a poor broke loser. Like I thought like Grant Cardone even made this very cringy video about CoffeeZilla, about saying how CoffeeZilla is poor and broke and this and that. I mean, I'm sure Grant Cardone's mind probably exploded when CoffeeZilla was on Joe Rogan, because a lot of these gurus just fantasize about being on Rogan. So, there's this quick knee jerk us versus them with it. Right. And there's a set thing of like sayings and almost maxims. If you get criticized, you must be mad, bro. You jealous? So it's just this weird thing. And then you even see like the fans of this stuff, or the acolytes of this stuff, like if I criticize, say, whatever, we'll say Alex Hormozy again, like his fans will come on like, you're just jealous, bro. You'll never be a billionaire like he is. Billionaire? And then a lot of them come like, oh, you don't get the conversions like he does, or he doesn't get the attention he does. You're just using his name. And it's just like this immediate defense of it, right? And it's not quite like a trolling or or an argument or a debate. Like, I mean, sometimes you see on like the political Twitter, people will troll each other all the times, and it's it's full of snark and everything. But it's this weird kind of like defense of this thing, right? It's not it's not like President Biden and Donald Trump like attacking each other on Twitter. It's like this weird defensive things. And you're outside the mold. You don't understand. So it really becomes this way of life. This very anxious inducing habits, the mindsets, you got to go to the events, you got to spend money on it, you got to go to this, it's conversions, you got to level up, you got to read the books in this way, you got to say, read this book, you got to do this. So it becomes it's just this weird, bizarre, I think, polytheism. There's my long rant.
That's a really, I get it, because I can see the exact same thing modeled in the New Age world, where it's like, from a Christian framework, it's like works-based salvation in a cult of personality. Right. Like the cult of personality. Yeah, exactly. And because I did a whole podcast episode about cults of personality, where money and attention flows upwards so that you get a sense of belonging. And that belonging is framed by whoever this individual man kind of says is popular. So it's like, well, I'm going to go along with this team and I'm going to belong to this cult of personality. And it's about the guy. It's not about the ideas. And I think that's a really dangerous trap that a lot of men fall into. And I know it exists in the New Age world, and I know it exists in the masculinity space. But now that you describe it that way, yeah, I can absolutely see that in the capital S success world for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, because it's a live or die by it. Yeah, because it's not. I mean, in a sense, there is a cathedral. I mean, you can go see, learn how to be a live speaker, and it's all framed and everything, and it's all part of. You're showing these motions. Like, I know, I've been plenty of events where they, it's like, oh, we sold so many courses at this event. But one of the things is it's this passage of right. If you're the first person to stand up, say like at a Dan Kennedy event, you're the first person to stand up and go get a course. You are signaling to the others your righteousness, that you are a hustler, that you are this, that you are part of it. Wow. So then everyone else is like, well, I better invest in myself, because then it's like, for those of you standing up, I guess you just want to be left behind. Right. So, and then, so that's just one element of it. Right. And then after that, then you got to go to the networking things. Then you got to go to this, and you got to pay to be in it. And then of course, then it goes into all of the other things I just mentioned. But yeah, it's a fascinating world.
That sounds really dark, right? But I mean, I can understand how go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, it is. And I think it gets there quickly. The thing, I think a lot of people think I hate anything gurus, or hate anything, motivational, or hate anything like that. But that isn't the case, because I think it's a lot of people, and it's reaching for better, right? it's a lot of people who want to do better, or who are raising their hand in some way, shape, or form to do better. And not everyone is going to do better, because it's easy to get caught up in that world's, I'm just going to read all the habit books, the mindset books, the marketing books. I'm going to read all this, but that kind of becomes procrastination, as and they don't realize it, right? They're posting about, they're doing the work, they're doing what it takes, they're doing everything, but they're just focused on so many superfluous things. Like their motivation is on the wrong sorts of things. And it's the same thing sort of in New Age. I mean, New Age is, there's still people who kind of reaching in a different way for some spiritual something. And New Age offers in weird ways, like, get ripped through yoga, but then also have your chakras lined up to the next divine spirit of multiple worlds. But
you're good at that.
Well, you wanted to get ripped through yoga first, like, so good for you. But it's like, what? Yeah. Where did that just
slow down there?
So, but it so quickly does slide into that darkness. As well-intentioned as it is, it's so quickly, and it's not malicious, right? Some people on mindset people, they're not going to be, they're really not, they might be like annoying to sit next to on a plane, where they're just telling about mindset and hustling. You're just like, just please leave me alone. Like, okay, got it. Mindset, hustle. Right. So, but they're not, but it's like this spinning hamster wheel that they're on, where all their motivation is on this one thing, where it just one little step off that hamster wheel and onto their purpose, or onto something else, or taking some time to reflect, is going to put them on a much better, more grounded path. I'm like, no, I need the next Tony seminar. No, I need the next whatever, New Age, whatever. They anger orgasm seems to be the thing over there. That's like everywhere.
What?
It's like
what?
Anger.
Whoa.
I don't. It's just sounds.
Now I'm going to look it up, and I'm going to regret it.
Yeah. So, but it's unfortunate, because I think it is a lot of well-meaning people who, and of course, there's a lot of bad apples in it, but it's a lot of well-meaning people, and they just get very, just led into very weird alleys.
And I think the gurus themselves, whether it be success or New Age or hustle or whatever, I think they get kind of led into it as well, where it's like they start to get a little bit of taste of the money and the attention, and it becomes like maybe they got into it originally because they care, but then there's the almighty God of, you got to scale. You got to scale this. You got to do more with less, and so you slowly start bringing back quality and more. And I think it ensnares. Like, there are the bad actors who go in knowing that they can deliver little and get a lot if they package it the right way. But I think it also becomes very dangerous for the men going into this, and women for that matter, who start to mistake themselves for the object. Right now, this isn't about me. This is about helping these people. I think that gets very fuzzy very quickly if the people don't have their, like we're talking about, they don't have their values properly aligned. How are you going to navigate through, 6 figures and, speaking engagements and all that? Like, unless you know really who you are, how are you going to survive that with your soul intact?
Right. I've seen a lot of that happen, there's guys, even just on a basic financial element, there's a lot of men in it where you suddenly, like, where that income hits, and they think, even though they made $1 million, they might have spent $1 million to make that $1 million, but they forgot that they spent that $1 million, and they think they're now millionaires. And they're like, well, I got to start living like a millionaire in order to keep making more, to drive myself to make more. And I've seen that wipe out so many people. There are so many people. I was in the ClickBank affiliate world who have come and gone. One of my first years going there, I got invited to this party, and it was at at one of the top of the Vegas casinos there, the suite, and this thing was just like outrageous. But those guys inside of a year were completely bust broke and completely had to move back to home, gone, just vanished, gone, all of it gone. But it is easy, because if in that world, it's its own echo chamber in a sense. And I notice in success, if you do well, like if you write a couple of hit offers and you go to an internet marketing party, and you're a, somewhat attractive man or girl, all of a sudden you're like a rock star to this tiny little world. And it can get kind of, it can go to your head very easily. And you think like you run the world. Or you don't realize that Grant Cardone might be doing he knows what he's doing, right? Like he turns it, like some guys can do a shtick and they can turn it off. And some of them, they just try to become the shtick. And it just becomes very sad. They try to live their life by this particular shtick, and it gets very, very sad, and then they keep slithering into new things, and they try to keep, living this life. And it gets very sad. They're very self-unaware. Man, there are some relationships in there that are just toxic disasters. But you think like, oh, my partner, she's also a hustler.
Right.
Okay, that's great that, she's hustles on her internet marketing, but what values aside from that are you guys concerned about versus trying to do Tony Robbins platitudes to each other to express your hustle love? Like, it's not quite going to work, so it is unfortunate, and it can be, very misleading in many ways.
And I think these are the downsides of success that gets hidden behind the shininess and the photographs and the reels or whatever, where it's like this world becomes very cutthroat, where you get access to these rooms because you're on a winning streak. Well, what happens if you hit a losing streak, right? Or what happens if you decide that you don't want, like, you've made your money and you want to cash out? Like, will these people still be your friends? Or are they all in this room because they enjoy competing and one-upping each other? Like, they're all trying to achieve the high score. It's not actually about friendship, connection, brotherhood. That's maybe how it's framed. That's how the photographs are put together. But you're still swimming with sharks, and they're not eating you this week, but you might be on the menu next week. But you can't see that. No. You can't see that in the world. You just see like, oh, I want into the room. It's like, are you sure you want into the room?
And the crazy thing is, and I'm, and I've seen it, especially much more on the marketing side, and might not be, well, I have seen some of it in the new age world as well.
Yeah.
But, in the marketing side, there are all these guys like who suddenly make it big, and they're just blowing the money. But there's kind of these more behind the scenes players. Like the guy I was with, for the company I was with, was very behind the scenes. And then there's kind of like this, I don't know, this sense you put off that you're in that behind the scene world, and these guys are doing their things, and they're looking at these guys like these guys are idiots, but they're looking at them too like, I can make money off this guy. Right. Like they just wrote, by chance, they lucked out with this massive offer. It's making a ton of money. So then immediately they come in and like, here, I'm going to make you a ton more money, but they don't tell them like, as soon as you dry up, I'm kicking you to the curb. Yeah. Right. So it's almost like this unspoken, like insider music industry of the 60s. Like, oh, if you can't do the hit singles anymore, see ya. And I kind of, and it was, and a lot of guys don't realize that, right? Like they don't realize that they're paying $100,000 to be in this mastermind, but the guy is working on the mastermind, and there's plenty of other people there where he would never dare ask for $100,000 to be in the mastermind, because he knows that guy is a behind the scenes sort of guy. They're not out there boasting about themselves, or they're not out there spending a ton of money. There are some guys who know how to turn it on, but they know where to turn it off, and it's a very different thing. And a lot of these guys, a lot of men especially, want to believe that's that face value right away, that this is what they're like all the time. I'm going to pay this. Like if you're really good, you're going to get invited to kind of see behind these curtains a little bit, and that that changes things. And it's very, not a lot of guys see that behind the scenes thing, because it's not really like, there's no like cabal back there. I mean, right. I mean, it somewhat is when there's all types of deals. Like when you find out that for the world of affiliate marketing on a page like ClickBank, it's really 3 or 4 people who've been on that front page for years, and it's a battle between each other. And there's a couple of guys who'll come through the cracks, but they're battling for each other. But no one else really understands that. They're like, no, I'm going to make it. It's like, You can, but you also have to realize that there's 3 or 4 players that have been doing this for a long, long time behind the scenes. And they are bull sharks, white sharks. And they're just 100% predators. They know exactly what they're doing. But yeah, a lot of people they just don't want to realize that, right? They're just so focused on the hustle and hype, and I'm going to make it.
Yeah, they're your meat. It's like I remember when I was in Las Vegas, I played. I was never I was never great at, but I did enjoy playing Texas Hold'em. So I went to Vegas with family and decided I'd go into the Texas Hold'em room. And I walked into the room and I sat down and I was like, yeah, no. I could just feel that like, this is a, when I say dangerous, like not physically dangerous environment, but you can just kind of get a sense that all these guys exactly know what they're doing. This is not casual for them. I'm meat. Pass. Like, I'm just here to have a good time and play some cards. These guys are here to take the whole table. And I'm not going to compete on that level with that. And I think you can walk into rooms like that and you can feel that like, no, this is predatory. This is law of the jungle. This is war. And I think that gets missed.
Yeah. I got that like the first time when I became known that I was one of the people from one of the offers I was with. It was at like a traffic, and there's a big event called Traffic and Conversion that's run by Ryan Dice. And then when the events had ended, when I was in the room with like, I didn't really speak to Ryan Dice, but I was in a room with other guys, and I'm like, man, they just completely played that room. Thousands of people buying this. I mean, they're really good at it. No one. And now like if I go out and call Ryan Dice, it's like, you're a jealous broke or loser. And it's like, okay. And it's like, I can't define them. Like I have been in the room, right? Like I've been in that exact same thing with like the high players. They're in this room, and it is there is a respect. And some of them, there's like, some of these guys viscerally hate each other, which is pretty funny. But there's kind of a respect there. With it, and it's just different. It's very odd. It's like, wow, this is a lot different. These guys don't know what they're doing out there. They're the ones that are meat, and they're successful, right? They're driven, they're motivated, they're trying to do better, but they're believing at face value. And it's like, man, can't you see what's going on in the room here? Can't you read it? But they just can't. It's tough.
Yeah, I mean, just to back up for a second to the conversation of values, and defining what your values are. Like when you as a man we as men define our values, this is what happens: is you suddenly recognize that you can't just fit into any room that you want to fit into, right? If you know what your values are, this is who I am, this is what I believe, this is what I'm about, and I've thoughtfully considered them, and I've read the books, and I've given real effort into forming what these are based on my experience and reason and all these things together. And now I know this is who I am. It's like, oh, I can't fit into this room anymore. I can't connect with these people anymore. I can't do this thing anymore. And it can become very disorienting for men to actually take a defined shape, because then they know like, wow, I'll never actually survive in that room full of bull sharks because I just don't care enough to try and twist myself into a shape where I can do this. Like it takes a piece of me to try and do that. Right.
And I think the thing is that room, they recognize that they can't, from my experience, that they can't really touch you when you're like that. They'll give you some sense of respect, but they're not going to try to hit you up for things. It's just very different, and some of the times it's intimidating to them, because you can ask them a question and they'll get real ruffled with it. But it is grounding when you realize like I don't need these guys. Like I'm not part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So as you've kind of started living in this way, how has it affected your writing? We talked about reading in the books and, how transformative that's been and sort of how it's affected your, I guess you might say the overlap of your personal and professional life. But how has it transformed your writing? And actually, how did you go from working for an auto empire into writing in the first place? I guess it was through copy, right?
Yeah. Well, to start there, yeah. The auto empire thing happened, and at the time, this is before the girl who threw my life upside down because it was all a show.
Wow.
I was with what was it, 26, 25. I was with a girl who was, she's a complete coke addict, complete alcoholic. I mean, just wild partier, a serial cheater, kind of thing. And it's just, I mean, I didn't know. I mean, I was just young and like, and coming into money, I'm like, oh, she's pretty, so I didn't really know, but also my focus was on my dad was, my focus was on that cancer thing. So after he had passed, I got into, this was like 2008. I got into like the pickup world. So like I was scared to break up with this girl, even though she was a coke addict, but I was in that place. I was so scared to break up, and I found this letter online, and then I used it, and then it worked. Right, it was like a direct marketing thing. I didn't notice it, and then I kind of got into it, and I was like, oh my god, right. So at first, I was doing like the pickup thing, but then I moved to Colorado, and I kind of dropped the PUA thing, but I was still somewhat interested in it because this was. I don't think all of that world was entirely bad. I met a lot of those. If you want to know what pickup artists are at an event, it's the one where all the women are running out of a room because after they tried their weird lines. But there were some guys in it who actually I think were very well-meaning because it was before kind of the ride. It drastically changed versus what it is now. But I sort of stopped it. But then I moved to Colorado and was looking like I got to get back into work, right? Like I was kind of coaching my old ski team, but I was feeling like calling to do something. And then I tried the auto business for a hot minute. I'm like, I'm not doing it. I still I just need more of a break from this. And I saw an email saying, position available is Tao of Badass, which is the name of this company. And so I was like, all right, well, I like their book. I'm like, it's in Denver. And they said, I'll just show up. Like, I have nothing else to do. It's on a Thursday. And I walked in and it was in a basement and like an old house in Denver. And I'm like, what is this? I mean, I'm used to the car business, I'm like, what? Like these guys aren't making any money. And they said like, hey, can you sell us this thing and write it? And I was like, all right. So I give it a crack. And I just like threw out all the car sales stuff I knew to try to sell this one item. I think they kind of just gave like it wasn't like a dating product. It was just something like, I was like, all right, I'll just try to sell it. And they like, all right, well, we'd love for you to show up. And I'm like, well, this is really weird. I don't know what this is. So I'm going to come in tomorrow and see. Then I kind of just kept coming back. And then they started saying the amount of money they were making. I'm like, there's no way. There is no way. These ragtag people in these basements are making money like this. I mean, they just said they made like $3 million last month. I was like, there's just no way. No way. But the guy, and I was like, all right, I'll just keep showing up because this is so titillating as far as like how weird it is. Right. And they kept having me, and I was writing emails. I had no idea that I was doing copywriting. Zero idea. They just had me write emails. I'm like, oh, whatever. Like, this is just so weird. I got to do it. And then the owner, his name was Josh Pellissier. He's like one of these seduction guys, very odd guy. He said, you have what it takes to be a great copywriter. And he goes, you're a new copywriter. Like, what? And I was like, huh? And like, by the way, we're number one on ClickBank. And I was like, what? What? ClickBank? What? What's that? I mean, I should know. Like, I've been there for 4 days, like doing this stuff. And then he said, go home and read the Halbert letters, and that was it for me. Because my dad was a little bit of a prepper, and I remember all like the survival magazines, and then I found it through the Halbert letters. I was like, oh my god, this is the stuff I was reading as a kid, like the defeat any man.
Oh wow!
I said, oh my god, and so I was like, yeah, I can do this. This is crazy. And I just kind of started doing that, and then I left the seduction thing. So was that 2013 or 14? I got into the health and weight loss, and I thought that was going to be cleaner than the seduction. It isn't. Way scammier. And then I was there. Yeah, I was there for till I left. And then the crazy thing was, so at that point, I was writing emails for 15 different lists. It has various different personalities. The feather in my cap offer was for an offer called Yoga Burn, which was just kind of came almost up out of the blue. But I knew I was lying to people, right? Like I was looking at myself in the mirror, and I said, today my day is going to be how to get around the lawyers, how we can get around Google's legal to get back onto Google. I'm like, that's my day today, to figure out how I can rhetorically dance around this stuff. So the scariest thing, so I stopped. I just couldn't do it anymore. And I felt the calling. I loved writing. And so I knew I wanted to do my website, and I knew I wanted to, kind of call out gurus, and I wanted to talk on, I had no idea where it was going to go, but I was like, I'm just going to call out gurus. I'm just going to start writing about this world. But it was a catharsis, because I had spent so long writing as that copywriter. When I started to write, it was scary to write as me. It took me almost 2 years before I was happy. I was in a fortunate place where I didn't have to work for anyone, but it took me 2 years to finally I wrote every single day. And it took me 2 years of finally being like, oh, okay. Cause I would sit down and write, and a sales letter would pour out. It was almost like, I don't know how to write as me. And was very scary, right? Cause I was so good at writing copy, and so good at writing these different personalities, and so good at, in particular, 3 different personalities, that when I sat down as me, I was like, I don't know where I am on this.
Wow.
So I just kept studying writing. And I kept just writing. And then eventually it's like, okay, I think I have something. It's either now or never before I go live. And then so I put it out there, and ever since then, that was 2020, but finding my values has, I'm sure my worldview comes across in my writing, but I'm more unapologetic about it, right? Because I am conservative, but I'm not going to try to take that out. Not that I'm trying to give partisan stances on, Tony Robbins, like here's the classical liberal take on Tony Robbins or something. No one cares, but it has come out, and I think it has taken a groundedness in just how I express myself. I'll always, every time I publish something, I always think it's the worst thing that's ever been put on the internet. And I don't ever want that vibe to go away. It's because it always drives me to do better for the next time. But I am noticing a confidence in my style. I'm noticing that I'm able to, express myself unapologetically. I'm able to put out the points that I want unapologetically. And I like that I can kind of come at it from different angles. So there is certainly, in knowing my worldview, knowing my grounded things. And again, like I might make some, a political joke or something, or a pejorative joke or something on it, but it's not going to come out. Like I'm not trying to make it political, but I know that if it's in the fabric of my writing, I'm not going to try to tone it down in any way, shape, or form. So I'm going to make it unapologetically mine. And, and I do have the readers in mind, because that's a thing. Everyone's like, oh, write for the reader. I'm like, well, first, I don't have any readers, so I'm going to write for myself. And then
right.
I'm just kind of, then I was kind of like an introvert. I'm like, well, I'm just going to keep writing for myself. And I'll figure the people who would want to sit down and talk to me are going to read this. Whoever's going to read it will enjoy it. And so I've just gone from there. So I don't have like an avatar of readers. There's standards that I hold myself up to. And those are different writers, but it's like, okay, I'm just going to put out there. And of course there is a thing, like, I'm not just going to totally write it to myself. That would be a lot of rambling,
right?
And inside jokes no one would ever get. But yeah, there is this aspect of getting finding a footing in that. And then, with readers and feedback, I'm like, okay, this is connecting with the people I wanted to connect with. And that's been like I said, it was like a 2-year process to finally write as myself. But since then, and finding that values, there's a lot more confidence in the fabric of what I'm writing. I see that my views, how they evolve, some are, grow firmer in my opinion. Some it's like, I don't really hold that view as strongly anymore. And that has, again, to keep repeating myself, it's definitely put a confidence in what what I'm writing.
That's interesting. I've kind of been watching this. I can see that I've been watching this now without really knowing what I was watching, because I first heard about you from Sean Smith. He spoke very highly of your copywriting. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, I know Sean. Sean's a friend, and so it's like anyone he speaks that highly, glowingly of, I'm like, okay, I'm going to pay attention to that, because he's a pretty credible guy in the things that he knows a lot about. And as I've encountered your work, what I've seen is that self-expression of your values beginning to come out, which is really cool now that I know kind of like what that is, because it sounds like in a way you've been on this profound journey of like, it's like it's simultaneously self-unlearning and self-learning. Like, okay, who am I not? Like you said, you're sitting down to write for yourself, and these different copywriting personalities are coming out. It's like I have to get all that out of my head so I can see who I actually am in there. And when you put that together with discovering values, like that's a very powerful life turning point for any man. Like when I empty out all the programming from my head of who I've chosen to be by my life path and who my career has made me into and what I thought I was doing and all that, when I empty all that out and see what's actually inside, what's left inside and what that guy believes, and then learning how to express it, like that's really incredible, actually. Like I really honor you for that.
No, thank you. Yeah, it was a catharsis. I mean, the first, from 2018 to 2020, I mean, I didn't publish a thing, but I just sat down and wrote every single day.
Oh, wow.
I was like, I don't know where this is going to go.
Right.
I mean, there were things like, and this is a bit of a side tangent, but in copy, I had literally forgotten what a verb was, and a noun. And even grammar. And then I really started studying a guy named Brian Garner. I guess you could say he was kind of one of those books that I've read that shifted things. And I got a chance to meet Brian Garner in person, and he's just a fantastic guy in person. Very, very smart. And I think he might have been kind of encouraging me, like, just write for yourself. But, there was this real catharsis thing of learning how to use the language of the writers I liked and the books I liked, because I was so sick of like the Seth Godin stuff. Yeah. And even now when I'm editing, it's still like I have to really slow down to spot like a grammatical mistake. Like I can recognize it, but if it's a really long sentence, but it's like I have to really, really slow down. And usually it takes me after I publish it, then I read it on my phone kind of like manically a couple of times the next days later. I'm like, oh my God, how did I miss that?
Right.
But that has been part of the catharsis is learning how to use, I was making a lot of money from the words I was writing, but now it's learning how to use the language and the words to express myself in a clear manner to a standard that I'm upholding myself to. And I'm gaining more confidence in that and having more fun with it. It's like the constraints are coming off and my style is starting to come out in how I'm expressing myself. And also it's kind of weird at moments, because at first, like a lot of copywriters came my way. I'm like, well, I don't always want to be doing copy. And now it's shifting towards something that I think there's something bigger out there, like the success is a religion. There's something about that I'm moving myself towards, because I didn't want to go down the CoffeeZilla route. That's nothing against like CoffeeZilla. I think he does great work, but it's like, I'm not going to be my whole Twitter thing is not just going to be calling out gurus. I mean, I'll call them out, but it's not going to be like that's not my whole purpose.
Right.
So it is a fun journey, like relearning language and expressing, and then, then trying to hold myself to someone like Niall Ferguson, trying to hold myself to his standard of writing or something is a lot of fun.
So I know personally a lot of men who are very interested in developing their writing skills. Maybe they came, from their own personal fitness journey, or they're definitely into developing their bodies, and they've done a great job with that. And now they're working on developing their hearts and developing their minds. And they put themselves into writing. And so I think they'll probably hear themselves reflected in a lot of things that you're saying. Do you want to talk a little bit about your writing journey, your writing process, what that has looked like for you, for the men who are listening, who are like, wow, who would be curious about okay, well, how does Jim go about doing what especially during that 2-year period where you wrote for 2 years every day without publishing anything? Like, what a grind. But I mean, that's kind of where it all comes from in a way.
Yeah. I mean, and that was that 2-year period. I was still doing my one meal a day. And I was still, I sleep till 7 a.m. now, but I was still getting up at 5 a.m. then. But it's funny now that, the more I left that world, the more sleep I ended up getting. So I get like 10 hours every night. The process, when I was doing copy, not that copy's bad per se, a lot of copywriters are trying to focus on the solutions and the headlines, but really good copywriters, they understand structures really well, and they understand the simple language really well. And they're not, so how to keep it simple, but the process is a little bit different, I think, than just pure writing. Like, when you start managing 15 email lists and all that stuff, I mean, the one gift I got from copywriting is, like if I'm staring at my computer right now, I'm like, oh man, how have I only written 300 words? And all of a sudden 20 minutes later, it's like 2,000 words, it's like, you just learn how to do it really fast. Not that you need to, but, the process there, to kind of go touch back on the copy for the process now, and then how I kind of got out of that process was, it really was, how can I present this particular product in a light that needs to be presented? Do we need clicks? Do we need this? It's constantly looking more towards that goal of what I need the customer to do, and kind of what is the best structure and the best language that can make that happen as fast as possible. And then I always liked, how can I raise doubts? And, so they have something that they're using now. How can I raise doubts in what they're using now and make them want to do something else here? Am I going to use a little bit of fear? Am I going to use something else, X, Y, Z? And, you can use those skills for good. It doesn't have to be dishonest in any way, shape, or form. You can, move something or move someone off of something in order to push your product. So I don't think all copy is unethical. So if you want to use, hint at some fear, you can do that. I think it's more unethical when you're lying about price and promise and all this stuff. And, so that's the copy side. The 2-year catharsis side was, I really did start studying language. I started like doing just writing exercises and regular writing books. I'm like, I don't know what a verb is, so I better learn what a verb is. I don't know how, I had like a vague idea, and it's like, geez, when I was in high school, I did great with grammar. I went to like a very demanding high school, and they had a grammar test, and I always aced it. I'm like sitting here, I'm like, I regressed. So but then for me, it's going to be different for different people. So if you're really serious about studying the craft of writing, do it. Study books on writing, study, Strunk and White, take, read books on grammar. Just get really curious about it. Get curious about how words work. I still struggle with grammar just because I think copy just kind of trained it out of me. But now that I understand it, like if I really slow it down, then I can get it. But it's a matter of expression. So the one thing is, be willing at first, especially when you're starting out, to learn how to express yourself using grammar versus just, farting out a whole bunch of words. It's great to get something out there, but the better you're able to use particular words or the particular effects of grammar, the better your message is going to be. And then the more you get used to it, right? Like your style is going to evolve and change as you grow as a person, and also as you gain more confidence in style, it's going to evolve and change. Then it might just kind of stay in a particular style. It's not saying you can't write in different ways, but that is going to take the more study of learning language and how to express language, and also being a good reader. I think reading books on grammar and writing helps you see like, oh, that's what Thomas Sowell is doing here. That's how that sentence works. So that's pretty interesting. So I might try to steal that. I'm going to try to steal that rhetorical effect. That's pretty neat. So when you study that, you got to keep trying and experimenting with it. Then in time, it starts to become your own, right? So my process is, I'm not pressed up against a wall to do anything, or not to do anything. I'm not pressed up against a deadline, excuse me. So I like to take my time to flesh things out and to really think about it in different various ways. And I think that's also, my 2 years was kind of in a sense of fleshing out, but you can do that in a very quick manner. It's always good to, if you're unsure what to write, just sit down and just start asking yourself questions, just start fleshing. It doesn't matter what you write, just try to get stuff out. And that can start helping to shape things. And then you can start shaping it into a draft or shaping it into an outline or whatever it is that you need to do. I mean, my process now is a lot of writing is probably more so done in my head than anything. My neighbors around here must think I am crazy because I really have something going, and I can get stuck on things. So I can get stuck on like a paragraph I'm writing. I'm waving my arms and talking out loud, and I'm sure they're like, "Oh, he's here again." Shut the shades.
Right.
But I like to write a lot in my head, but it's pretty much in the morning for 3 to 4 hours. I know past 4 hours, it starts turning in. I can start really cranking after 4 hours, but does it start turning into a rambling inside joke mess? So it's like I just cut myself off, So generally I try to be sitting down by about 8:30 or 9, and then I go till about 12 or 12:30. And sometimes that is, it's all writing, and sometimes it's just staring out my window. And then I have a kind of a weird thought train where I will just open. I don't have like a ton of tabs open, but I'll just kind of like Google something weird, but I don't pay attention to it. Like the other, like Google like a Roadhouse outtakes. I didn't pay attention to it, but then all of a sudden, because it's like this weird way where my brain starts breathing a little bit. And then finally I can get right back into what I'm writing. Like, that's what I'm missing. And then I just kind of go back. And that's like, I'll look at my history. I'm like, what was I Googling? Roadhouse outtakes. So it's kind of, I don't even Roadhouse? Remember. What's that?
The Patrick Swayze Roadhouse?
Yeah,
outtakes?
The Patrick Swayze one. It's just, I don't know. It's just my brain just kind of starts going to bizarre lengths. But, let yourself have that kind of, you want to be able to start creating that environment where you can have that. And, me writing in the morning doesn't mean you writing in the morning is going to be your thing. It might be writing at night. It might be writing post lunch. It's going to be very personal. But when you're starting to do it, because it's easy to read writing routines and want to try to start that routine, and that's great. But on the whole, over time, if you're going to be doing a lot of writing, you want to find that environment, that sweet spot where you're doing your best work, however many hours that is. And, you don't want to be doing just writing just for writing's sake. Like I saw some guru the other day. He's like, I wake up and have Mountain Valley water and write, then have an almond latte, then write, then have an almond latte, then write. I'm like, that just sounds like personal hell. Where it's just like, but I mean, you don't want to be boasting about it. You want to make your routine, whatever it is, your routine. And it could be 3 to 4 hours. It could be 7 hours. I don't know what it is, but whatever fosters that environment, that sweet spot of time. And also that sweet spot of time might be where it could be staring out the window for an hour, or it could be random Google searches that you never ever pay attention to. And that's what kind of, but whatever fosters that environment to keep you going. Is the big thing. It's like, and then, I think that's what keeps it, just kind of keeps you going. That just kind of keep your mind is kind of trained or not trained. I don't know. It's just a habit. Like my mind is always going on what I'm writing because I think it's a little bit of my routine. It's always going on what I'm writing. It's always the first thing in my mind is, reading always helps my writing, but like when I'm on a walk or even after I finish a set in the gym, I'm thinking I'm right back to what it is I'm writing. That was a ramble. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's, I think the biggest key takeaway there is it's you find out a way when you're new to it to make it your own, and then really foster that environment when you feel like it's a natural fit for you, where you don't have to be doing weird things, you don't, I guess my routine is like, I don't wear any athleisure or anything like that. I get dressed, and sometimes what I'm wearing for work, I won't wear when I'm finished. Like because I like to start reading in the afternoon. I'll just take it off. So, but this is kind of just a routine that I've got made from work from home. Whatever just starts to feel natural to you, that's the thing to foster and create.
That's great. That's actually great advice, because I obviously in the success, hustle, grind set world, there's all these different routines you can follow. Do my 5-step morning routine, whatever. I've never enjoyed those, just because it's like I wake up and I have something to do the minute I open my eyes. I have to go do this and this and this and this. I always resist that. But there is something that's like, okay, what do I actually need from me to be successful in what I do? What is the gift that I can give myself of knowing that this is what Will needs? Maybe no one else needs that, but this is what works for me. And I think that that's in all the success focused literature and podcasts and books and all that stuff. It's like men trying to force themselves into the mold of another man, what works for them, and losing sight of the fact that, like, no, you have to find out what works for you, because it's your process, not Ryan Holiday's. Or go ahead.
Right. Well, yeah, I think you nailed it. You nailed it on the head. And I think a lot of guys, they will try to say, like, I love Robert Caro in his book, Working, which is his writing process. And Robert Caro is one of the greatest writers ever. And, in his process, he writes 1,000 words a day, but I think he writes it very slowly because he likes to work through the draft that he wrote before. But some people say, well, just pick up right from where you left off and start writing. That may or may not work for you, or a hybrid may work for you. Sometimes I do that myself. Either I have to edit what I'm seeing before, or I just leave it. So it is finding what works for you. And then again, to repeat, when you're starting out, if you like a certain writer and this is his routine, then try it. But you're going to have to prune the edges to make it fit yourself. Like, you may be a 3 or 4 hour guy with zero distractions, or maybe every once in a while you have classical music on in the background or something like that, or maybe it isn't. Like Lee Child, the creator of the Jack Reacher series, his writing routine was, he got up, I think he had like a cigarette and a ton of coffee, then he just kept walking around New York City for hours. Then he I think like 3 or 4 in the afternoon, like he smokes weed or has like one joint, and he starts writing. And he writes with he's a one-fingered writer. His daughter orders him a pizza. So he has like a pizza at 10 p.m. at night that gets delivered. His daughter orders it for him. It comes to the door and delivers. But that works for him. That's his routine. It probably seems like for the hustle bros, he's not doing anything. He's just walking around probably someplace in Manhattan for hours, just drinking coffee, not doing anything. Then he just like, well, I don't know how much weed he smokes, but then he just sits down and just starts writing. Like but that doesn't mean like, oh, I got to start smoking weed at 4 p.m. and I got to have, I don't have a daughter, so I better have a daughter to get me a pizza at 10 p.m. Like,
Yes.
Like that's not how it goes. That's his.
What kind
thing.
of pizza is it?
Yeah, exactly. And he has the luxury of that time, because some of these writers, like I love, like Charles C.W. Cook over at the National Review is one of my favorite writers. I just love his writing style. But he has to meet deadlines, right? He's in condition to meet a particular style or what he is doing. But what works for him may not work for you, because that certainly Lee Child, that wouldn't work for Lee Child. I'm sure Lee Child could do fine writing as a journalist who needed to meet deadlines. But it's different, right? They go at different times, and who knows what works best for Charles and who knows doesn't. So that's the thing, is you really make it your own. Try a bunch of different writing routines, but over time, it's just going to feel natural. Like even my cats and my dog know my routine. So many years. Like my dog Noah, she can't wait in the morning. She just sits and stares. Like she sits on the couch and just stares at me, and I'm like, all right, you can come into the office. And she bounds in. She just knows. But if that's not happening, like if whatever life happens, she's like anxious. Same thing with my cat. He'll start knocking over books. Like, it's time to get in there. Like, because they're so used to it. But yeah, and that takes time, right? I mean, I could list it out and sell it as a course of this is my thing, but it just takes time and then it just becomes your own. And then, it's just a very fostered environment over time.
I think all this stuff it's so important because one of the topics that's kind of floating around in my mind in this conversation is ChatGPT. The impact that AI writers are going to start having, and the consensus from men that I respect seems to be that like more idiosyncratic voices will start rising to the top because AI can't actually imitate an actual, fully developed human being. And so if you want to be successful in writing, how are you going to be better than AI? It's not that difficult, but how are you going to be better than an AI? And that involves your values and who you are as a man. And that involves how do you go about producing the things that reflects your values. So I see all these things kind of putting back together. Like, how are we going to be human beings in order to compete with the robots?
Right. Because there's this kind of this thing of handing our thinking over to AI.
Yeah.
And then the retort is often like, well, you wouldn't know, bro. Like, I could show you Edward Gibbon, ChatGPT, or real Gibbon. You wouldn't know. I'm like, I don't think good writing comes down to a parlor trick. Like, if I mistakenly pick ChatGPT or Gibbon wrote that and it's ChatGPT, it's not like this total own, like, oh, bro, you're replaced.
Right.
That's why, obviously, I know that it's not a sentient being that people think it is. It is an incredible tool. I think it is going to radically alter copywriting, probably in a good way, because many copywriters are weirdos. And a business won't have to deal with some weird guy charging them $10,000 for something that may or may not work. And then the weird guy, like copywriters are a weird bunch. So it will change that. But I keep thinking of the South Park, the recent South Park episode where they had ChatGPT on it, and it was so well done. Because I'm noticing a lot of people don't understand, and where I've seen this in the like money Twitter success is, everyone's goo gaga over what ChatGPT wrote, and people can put in better inputs to create better writing. But so much of it right now, and this may change, is so trite and so cliched. It's just like full of chestnuts. And there's a great piece somewhere by I don't know if it was, I forget who, it was a top journalist somewhere in the, put in, prompts like, can you please do it without platitudes? And then it just comes right back with platitudes. Can you please say that? And then it's like, okay, and then try the prompt of, okay, can you say this as, I forget what it was, like as Elmore James. So writes is like, okay, can you say this as Elmore James with no platitudes and cliches? And then immediately pumps out platitudes and cliches. So, but I noticed a lot of people on money Twitter, they don't understand like what a platitude or a cliche is, right? They don't understand that the Seth Godin book is just all platitudes. And ghostwriters are really, really talented at knowing how to kind of write that pandering style. And that is not at all a knock on ghostwriters. They're, like someone like Joshua Lezek is very talented at what he is doing, because they know how to write those sentences. And Joshua is a good writer, but you read other other ghostwritten nonfiction. And it's like, if you just, no wonder why people aren't looking at arguments. They're just looking for the lessons, because every sentence is just the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again. But people are like, this is revelatory. No, it's not. It's a bunch of old chestnuts. It's like someone sprinkled fortune cookies sayings on the thing. And, and I thought, coming back to people aren't understanding that, right? They're not understanding, like, that's a big thing where we're kind of a post-literate society where they can't see the platitudes and the trite hackneyed sayings and everything, and that will work for copy, because copy is a formulaic prose, and it is a vulgar prose. It has it, and that's somewhat a knock, but it's also not a knock. It's just the way copywriting works. But coming back to the South Park episode, I thought it was so genius that they all of the text. It comes with him texting his girlfriend, and all he does is just put the text, and there's no interaction. He just puts the text into what she says, and she's loving it. And then, she confronts him saying, oh, that thing that happened in Switzerland. And he's like, oh, what? So there's no human element, right? Has done all the thinking for him. Then the other element is when they start writing papers for school. It's all biased crap, right? Because ChatGPT is still biased. If you really look at it, and I think that's a big thing of understanding worldview and values, is you can see sometimes some writers, you can sense a little bit of that worldview in their fabric, whether you agree with it or not. Be like, okay, they're coming from this position a little bit, which I think is a good thing sometimes, right? Because I think they're more unapologetic when they're not trying to deny it, if they're not trying to manipulate through it or anything. But all the papers are, Cartman writes a neoliberal feminist look of post-industrial, some serious, right? So it's all this biased crap, or Butters has this thing on, immigrants through the eyes of this, so it's all this biased crap. And then the ending is, I thought this was really brilliant. And I think South Park made a statement on this. The ending is they wrote it using ChatGPT, and it's such a cardboard ending, right? It's so predictable. But they have this character, Shadowbane, that ChatGPT is not going to suddenly likely come up with a character Shadowbane, which is this weird guy with a hawk that screams and he's throwing weird things. Like, it's not going to be able to predict or really generate something so out of the box. So, that does come back to the idiosyncratic thing. The more you learn the language, the more you express yourself. ChatGPT may be able to imitate your style, but that's all it is. It's an input-output. It's like a very, it's a better Wikipedia or better Google, but it's not going to suddenly generate your style. And that's what's going to make you stand above when everyone else is focused on the Hemingway app or Grammarly or this or that in third grade writing.
Yeah.
I'm going to write this blog post like this. Like, if you're just reading content creators and not able to express your personality in your particular style, whatever that style may be, and to do it with a lot of clarity, you're not going to stand out next to, some ChatGPT, some blog company that uses ChatGPT to make up a personality and it writes blogs on who knows what, supplement optimization or something.
I'm so glad you mentioned Hemingway, because I used that for a while and just to clean up some of the copy. But there was one post that I wrote where I really tried to follow all of its suggestions, and I found that it bashed all of the me out of my writing. Like, oh, sorry, Ernest, I used a comma. Like, my bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Can I make this, 10 words?
It loves ellipsis.
Does it really?
Yeah, just loves it. And you can use that and get a grade 1. And I remember, the funny thing is the formula and the algorithm is really messed up. It's trying to use the Flesch-Kincaid test, but everyone, including Grammarly, has bastardized that Flesch-Kincaid test, which is you want to be 18 words or fewer, and it's counting, it's counting the syllables. But the real Flesch-Kincaid test, if you read the book, a semicolon or a colon, or if it's kind of measuring, or if we're using if the sentence is really long, but it's shorter syllables, it's still going to grade, it would give like a grade. It's very readable, right? So that Hemingway fails on the Hemingway app, but the algorithm is really messed up, and it's always on Jack kicked the ball, Jill watched the ball.
Profound.
It's always like this very, very wooden cadence that the Hemingway app like, and it can really take the life out. Same with Grammarly. Those tools, Grammarly, if you want to use it for just some grammar mistakes, that's fine. Just be aware it's wrong 50% of the time. But we're all going to miss the it's or there, or we're going to.
Right.
So it's okay. That's good for that. But yeah, those Hemingway apps, do they just suck the life out of it?
And if you actually read Hemingway, read For Whom the Bell Tolls, and then feed your writing into a Hemingway app and see if you actually think that what comes out sounds anything like Ernest Hemingway. Right. Because the depth and the beauty and the power of his language isn't, the brevity is the container that it's in. But the self and the power of the expression comes through so much more than just the word, the number of syllables in the sentence. There's more to it than that.
Right. And even for any of the copywriters listening, that it's even Hemingway app has a great habit of taking all of the cadence and rhythm out of the writing. So copywriting
Yeah.
depends a lot on rhythm. I mean, all good writing has rhythm, right? Like Atomic Habits is so wooden. It's the same. It's like 15
Mhm.
word sentences over and over and over and over and over and over again, right? There's no variety of sentences. But good writing really does have a good rhythm, and readers really like that at any level of reading, whether it's a sales copy or something else. But Hemingway's not going to miss that. Hemingway is going to miss the music. When you're
Yes.
reading it, does it have a rhythm? Does it have a flow? If someone was speaking it out loud, is there pauses? Is that sort of natural intonation happening? Because readers, when they read that or listening, they're going to sense that really quickly. If it's very like stiff, or it just sounds like, Jack kicked the ball. Habits are good. People like habits. Okay. Okay. Wow. This is a great song. Because you got to think of, especially for copy, you got to think of it like a song, right? And not some weird esoteric thing. You got to think of it like a Huey Lewis song. It's a good pop formula, very concise, a lot of rhythm to it. And Hemingway is it's just one note all the time.
Yeah, and it just sort of makes me think about going all the way back to the start of the conversation. We started out talking about, 3,000-page Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon, right? Like
Yeah.
the research and the depth and the beauty and the power of writing. Like I haven't read it yet, but like just compare, talk a little bit about some of the writing of that versus some copywriting is such a different world, but versus like the Hemingway app, ChatGPT stuff. Like it's the humanity isn't even the word, like capital H humanity that I imagine must come through that book must be profound.
It is. I mean, the big thing, and this is it's an overlooked style. It still exists today, but so Gibbon wrote in what's called a classical English style. And a lot of people understandably aren't really taught that style anymore. But if you read those books from the 1700s, from maybe like about 1680s till early 1900s, and even Winston Churchill, he uses the classical English style. Herman Melville also used it. Dickens uses it. And it can be used for great rhetoric effect, like Churchill. People are like, "Oh, Churchill used big words. He doesn't know persuasion." Like, well, he persuaded an entire world to defeat the Nazis. Like, I think it's pretty good than selling a Tribulus supplement or something. Like, good job. So he uses a classical English style, which is the very basics of it is a mix of Saxon and Latinate words. And there's also a use of repetition, and there's a use of which can either emphasize a point, or you can use certain words, like really big Latinate words right next to a really small word to create a point, to kind of have a humorous element. So you kind of use these big, ponderous, superfluous words, like real florid, and then all of a sudden it's this real ugly little like word. Like it just comes out, and then it's like it comes out to a real like nasty word or something, like this real nasty Saxon word. But he's doing that. It's doing that for this beautiful effect. There's a great book called Classical English Style by Ward Farnsworth that unlocks that style and shows how it's done, and it really unlocks a lot of those books. Like some of like the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton wrote. I mean, Alexander Hamilton wasn't the stylist that Edward Gibbon was, but you still see how you can use this idea to present ideas. And then when you see that style, you're like, oh, wow. And once you know it, you're like, oh my God, this is just awesome. So he does that. He'll do something like he'll use big Latinate words. And then he'll, in the next phrase, then he'll use a semicolon and say the same thing with all Saxon words. And it's doing this effect of here are all the big ideas, but then here it isn't how, here's a kind of an analogy saying the same things, but it really paints this beautiful picture. And he just does it so well. It's just so amazing. And it is very readable. I mean, I can't imagine. There are some books that sort of helped me tackle it, or still tackling it. But it is just so beautiful how he presents something. How, especially if he's able to take something, he's able to have a lot of fun. Like he's able to show a double standard behavior of, say, paganism or Christianity or of a leader or something like that. And he's able to kind of add in a little bit of flair that makes it a little bit more readable about what this guy was doing. So he's able to show this, he's having fun, but how he's doing that is you're able to really capture like why Julian was very conniving and very smart, but you're able to capture it when he uses like a turn of phrase that makes you, smirk. You're able to capture so much of what's going on, right? You're able to kind of capture a feel of what people, of what he's doing, which is just fascinating. And especially too, when he shows some of the most harrowing elements. I mean, that's the thing that is through that book all the time, is that man is tragic. I would say, to kind of quote, Thomas Sowell again, the constrained vision, Gibbon is definitely constrained, that, man is flawed. And he shows that, like war has a nature, and sometimes it's very ugly. They can come in with the best of ideals, but there are going to be those people who are just going to, it's just awful, what can happen, when an entire bloodline is purposely wiped out. Or, when, they're coming and you're part of the, certain, like the Huns just had no care about, rape or anything like that. They just thought that was part of the thing. So imagine coming in and, but they're purposely taking husbands and fathers, and soldiers are, raping the women in front of them. They're, and it's just how he's able to take those harrowing things and allow pause and reflection. Right. He doesn't glaze past it. He uses a particular style to allow you to just rest with us a moment. Then in a couple passages later, or soon enough, he's able to kind of inject some humor again to kind of get you like, oh man, like he's able to not keep you so like, he's not just sitting there with like ennui, like the world is awful. He paints this picture of man, and then is able to kind of release the tension, a few paragraphs later. And that just makes it so compelling and so human, and so beautiful of how he does that. How he's able to capture, the foibles that are funny of man, but also just the harrowing, abhorrent things that happens. And in a sense, he's making the kind of warnings of the past in a very graspable way. He's able to show these warnings of the past. Like, this is part of man. This is who we have. Like, when war happens, this is going to happen. We're not going to suddenly change. We're going to have to find our best way to handle this. And he does that in such a good job.
Would you say that reading this book is transforming you or changing you?
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, on multiple levels, there's so much to it. I'm not like a foreign policy expert, but in my opinion, and I'm not saying that Gibbon is necessarily pushing this opinion, but I see like the importance of having deterrence. With your government having deterrence. I'm also seeing, I have a lot of more pride in how smart the founding fathers were in the system they set up, because it is a stable system. They clearly learn their lessons. Like, well, this could happen, so hopefully not. So I think that's a beautiful thing. I think the element of one of the big things that Gibbon has in there, and it's more implicit versus explicit, is his themes of civic humanism. And I mean civic humanism in the terms of Aristotle. And also, I will say, since people think Gibbon's anti-Christian, he very much reveres Christian ethics. Just to say that, like he reveres Jesus, but he questions the deity, but he doesn't it's very even-handed, I find. People might take different opinions, but I find that he doesn't, he's not like dumping on Jesus or anything like that. He just has his questions. And I don't know where Gibbon finished in the rest of his life with that question. He's also a man of his time when deism was kind of there. But he has this thing of the civic humanism, the Aristotelian sort of virtues. And if anything, to kind of go on the tangent, I mean, I think Gibbon does not like Plato. He respects the ideas, but he blames a lot on Plato. But as much as as important as Plato is, as he says. But anyways, coming out of my ramble here, the civic humanism he really shows how important it was for both men and women to have particular values. He shows the importance of men and women during that period, and going through the history of time of even just of exercising, of having physical strength, and doing rigorous physical exercise, even if they were in the Senate and they weren't going to ever go to war, but they still had some sort of physical, exercise that they were undergoing. And a lot of them, I guess, what seemed to be popular at certain times is they would kind of train like soldiers. Not that they were necessarily going to do that, but they had it in some sense of a pride of if the barbarians came to the gate, they could handle themselves, or that they were strong. But they also but it goes deeper into having this aesthetic personal taste. And you can see that kind of in the statues back then. Like, this was something to uphold. And they probably also had this idea that it's going to keep you healthy, because they didn't have a lot of medical. I mean, there's a lot of medical woo-woo back then. Like, well, if you stare at the sun, maybe it'll fix whatever's growing on your arm. So they probably,
I don't know, I think I still kind of do that.
Yeah. So, but they had an idea that if you had physical strength, probably you were going to do better, which we know more now of. But the beautiful thing that Gibbon shows is, so there's one element of this physical strength for both men and women, this physical aesthetic for both men and women, to uphold yourself to a particular standard. There's this one on courage, but there's also courage, but also like this development of taste in the mind. So, to prevent the mindset bros seem like, oh, see, it's all about mindset. That's true. They had that. But there's this element where the citizens, or a good citizen, was upholding themselves to having taste in literature, having taste in the arts, having personal taste. But Gibbon shows that it wasn't easy, and that it isn't easy, but it's always something you're kind of self-educating. He always has this element of self-educating yourself on wisdom. And he shows that the better leaders, or the better emperors of that time, really worked towards that. To have this kind of sense of taste, the sense of reflection. Even if they were flawed people, the sense of knowing literature helped them just kind of have more, just a better admiration for themselves, or better, more people admire them because they had, they had the gifts of just wisdom and reflection, but also for themselves, for their own sanctity. And he does a really beautiful job of showing how important that is for the individual. And he really does an important job, or beautiful job, of showing it for both men and women to uphold themselves to these particular values, and that it takes work and time. And he just does this wonderful job with it, that I just find fascinating.
If you have a few more minutes, I want to be respectful of your time, but if you have a few more minutes, one of the things I've noticed that you post on Twitter is that you push some pretty heavy weights up. And so you're a man who seems to embody, literally, no pun intended, however, some of the values that Gibbon is talking about here. And I think a lot of men are sort of mining that front lines and saying that, like, well, we have to be strong in body and strong in mind and strong in spirit. And these are not separate or different things. But sometimes, a lot of men, particularly writers, can kind of let their bodies wither away and they become kind of like brains in a jar. Maybe they can have great output, but they're not the Roman Senate training for when the barbarians are at the gates, right?
Right. And it's tough because, on like Twitter, you see things like, I only trust guys with physiognomy checks, and it's tough because you see a favorite writer who's just in bad health, but God, the guy is smart, so it's tough.
Yeah. But Chesterton.
Yeah.
G.K. Chesterton would not have passed a physiognomy check, but like that dude, he was dialed in. C.S. Lewis would not pass a physiognomy check.
No. I know Thomas Sowell was in pretty good shape, but now he's like 93. Well, hey, give it to him. The guy's like 90. Yeah, he's 93 or something. So obviously something's going good. But yeah, Gibbon, it isn't important, and it is tough, right? Because we think it's just easy to like I believe in physical exercise. Like it really does help me. Like in lifting heavier weights, I didn't really start doing that until 2020, and that has been a huge help in my writing. I mean, I've always been very avid working out, and that's always been, I think, just a great mental thing. But going really heavy in what I'm doing has just been just great. It's like heavy 5x5 squats is one of the best psychological therapy sessions known to mankind, and I look at these guys who want to do like the weekend warrior, go to Malibu and cry for a weekend and have Bedros Keuilian call you a dumb bitch all weekend. It's like, I just want to tell these guys, like, just have a harder lifting routine. Like, just have a harder lifting routine, or go to a judo gym and get thrown around, or go to Muay Thai and get kicked in the face. Because, like, you don't need to be having Bedros Keuilian put a waterboarding you to tell you how much you're a bitch. And then at the end, like, just have some more difficult, rigorous physical routine that you are undergoing. Try powerlifting, see if you can do it. And you might be cursing at yourself, but it's way better psychology. But this aspect of how he puts it through having taste is really good, because I think aesthetic taste, and he puts it in various different ways, from art to music to literature to even just having good humor. Because Gibbon definitely is very much where he sees the intolerance of both paganism and at the times Christianity, and he saw that kind of meshing. It's like they just kind of forgot the good humor side. They just kind of just have a little bit of a good humor. But developing that taste in it is not easy, but it takes trying to grasp things over your head, which can be try to get into some of the great works of literature, or try to understand the art. And you don't need to go and be like, oh, this art must be a statement against the English Revolution or something like that. Like everyone tries to do that stuff, but just go and have you just work to develop that touch and reflection around that. It is so important, and it's not because we have limited time during the day. But taking time to do that, as Gibbon kind of shows how certain great men and women throughout history, how they did that is just, it is a standard to uphold. Like I just read there was this one last bastion in the Roman Empire that not only maintained, the Roman Empire just kind of fell into decadence and stagnation, and then just kind of fell into wanting its own vices. And then when the barbarians showed up, they were like, well, we just been having an orgy for a couple of years. You can't take us over. And these guys don't. It's like, we have great buildings. It's like, well, we don't give a crap, right? And there were still, he gives these beautiful stories of these kind of last remaining people who held on to these things, and they stood out in time. Mm-hmm. But there was the Amazones or something, they held on to the fortitude and the arts. I guess they had like a real beautiful city. They held on to the having high taste, having courage, having fortitude, having everything, right? It's kind of the ultimate. And so when the Huns showed up, they fought and they held the Huns back. And it's just kind of this very touching moment. Like, here's like the last little like village somewhere out there for the thousands of years, maintained itself through the changes from paganism to Christianity. They upheld the morals, they upheld the arts. The people come and they're not sitting there like, drunken at a bar or something, like, oh no. Mm-hmm. They fought, men, women, and children fought for their old patriotic pride and held off this country. And it's just beautiful because you can see that this community or whatever it was, the majority of the people didn't let go of what made the Roman Empire great, what would have been by this point, like 1,000 years before. And it's just fascinating and beautiful reading that, how they upheld us. And even to the last few people, men and women who they maintained the values, they bought in and they had this patriotic pride. And, when everything was going to hell, but they died for these things. And this is very wonderful picture of it, of these. And you see even some of these old men couldn't fight, like I guess the first time the barbarians showed up to the Roman Senate, these old men haven't fought in years, but they're taking up arms, like you're not taking my daughter, they're taking up arms. Or even some of the women, like, we're going to take up arms. Screw you guys. You killed my husband, you killed my son. I'm coming, and they may not have had any sort of skill to do with it, but they're, it's just that they had that, this is what I have to do. And it's just beautiful how he paints that, how that's through values. And it's not just all brawn, because, the barbarians came in and they were kind of the missing courage that the Romans used to have, that was also tempered with, better, with values of taste and reflection and dignity and politics. And no, it wasn't perfect. There was a lot of conniving, but there was something a little bit better about it than just becoming routine killers. When they came, they had a lot of courage but no knowledge, and then they just wiped all these people out. But here's like these last few people hanging on to it. Oh man, just gorgeous how he depicts that.
That sounds amazing. Actually, that sounds like the kind of inspiring picture that I think a lot of people would be looking for right now. Like, how do we preserve what is important to us in the face of our own particular barbarians, I guess.
Right. And I mean, it's fascinating that when patriotism starts to fold, and then also that, like, the patriotism is involved of holding yourself up to a particular ideal out of this sense of good pride, not bad pride, but good pride. When that starts to fold, man, it just goes sideways. But seeing these last remnants of people who held on to that, and in some ways, some of them, they saved, some of the great works that we have today. Like St. Augustine, I mean, Gibbon definitely knows his theology. I mean, he really knows St. Augustine. He really knows the Bible. But St. Augustine was, you could call him maybe Machiavellian and things, but he was able to maintain certain things that fortunately that did such a great job for Western civilization later, because he was able to uphold these kind of particular sets of values. And these other people who are dying, you kind of maintain these values. When the barbarians respected them, and when the Huns came and said, geez, these people, they mean business, they respected them in some way, shape, or form, because they had this sense of fighting for something bigger than themselves. And also that bigger than themselves was also part of the pride from where they are from. And we have a lot of repudiation today of the pride of where we are from at multiple levels. And I see it even on both political sides. There's a sense of repudiation on things. But man, it just seeing when they come together to do that, to fight off, Attila the Hun was just, his soldiers were like, oh, they were brutal. And Attila was like the one smart guy. And he just had, it's like he basically just unleashed animals, and he knew how to do it. Even though he had political smarts, he was just basically unleashing the animals onto people. But when these people or these animals saw this group fighting back, there's a respect there, and they got curious about it. And that's how some ways, how some certain Christians survived because they respected the religion of it, because the Christians, because their faith and ethics were able to kind of keep them like going. Whereas if it was just like some kind of more academic, like, how do you not liking my ideas? The barbarians just killed him because he wasn't willing to really die for his ideas. Right. But the people who show courage and fortitude were able to regain their freedom again, where they were enslaved, all of their money gone, their family completely and utterly destroyed, but they were able to regain through courage, fortitude. They were able to regain freedom again. It took time, but man, it's just so beautiful how he puts that. And you see that ideal, and it's tough, right? It's tough to become both as strong as a barbarian, but also as to hold as much cultivated taste as, as I don't know, I'm just like, a cultivated taste as a classicist, as something like that. It's very difficult to uphold that and attain that. And he just shows how it is difficult. It's not easy, but these people who did it, they survived.
Hmm.
in some way.
Will you be writing?
What's that?
Go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, will you be writing about? I imagine you will be, but I want to. Are you documenting this journey through the book? Is there some way that you're surfacing this for people? Because I'm listening to you talk about this, and I'm almost living vicariously through your experience of reading these books. And now it's like, okay, now I got to go get them myself and start reading them, perhaps.
Yeah. So a reader of mine, his name's Will. He presented an interesting idea of me doing like a book club, and then I kind of said to him, like, I'm reading The Decline of Fall. Not a lot of people are gonna, that's it. I probably won't finish this whole thing until, my guess is July is when I'm going to finish this thing. And I started it on January 2nd of this year, so I'm guessing July. So I'm like, that'd be quite a book club.
I think you'd be surprised how many guys would be into that.
Yeah. So, but I tend to do articles about, the books I'm reading, but this one, through his sort of influence, I think the initial article first, and this is what I'm working on now, is kind of somewhat going to be almost a Q&A and almost an observation with my musings of it. Because I have found this to be a very distinct read. Like before I got into it, again, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, it's anti-Christian, it's revisionist, it's this and that. So I got all of these things that were wrong about the book, that weren't right, and all of these warnings. And then of course there's Twitter reply guys like, read Gibbon, bro. And I've gotten a couple of that on Twitter, and I'm like, yeah, I'm at the part with the Neoplatonists, and like, what do you think of that? Nothing. Then you can see like the manosphere, like, this is just like The Decline. Oh, not really. So I'm going to do sort of my musings on it, and I don't know exactly what it's going to entail. I'm going to try to put in some fun things about it. But, it'll be kind of the first email where maybe I open up about more of my personal politics and kind of what I see going on around in the world, and also from my position. And then, also I will talk about those particular individual standards, how beautiful that is, and how challenging it is, and how it's not easy to go lift 500 pounds for squats and then come home and then try to read, try to read some Charles Dickens or something, and then instead on the weekend, instead of shit posting on Twitter or something, to go to the museum and look at some great art, to kind of work to cultivate a more, that higher taste. And also to cultivate into a point where it is, your pleasure time or your downtime is something a little bit more, useful in a way. You're enjoying it. You're not purposely trying to grind through something, but it becomes a little bit like a higher sense of taste. So I'm going to, talk about that. The political one will be interesting, because I do see there's a lot of political lessons in there. And I'm also going to do, like, a lot of people are asking me, like, are we in the fall? Because a lot of people right now think like the collapse is happening in a week, and I see it on both the left and the right. Like, the collapse is happening now, and maybe a little more so on the, the doomer right. Like, no, we need to get a monarchy. It's happening now. Like, right. Reagan caused the collapse. Like, let's just cool it. Like, so, but I will say, like, there are some foreboding things that I see, and I will mention that, and I see, foreboding things from both sides. It's almost impossible to say if we're in the decline or fall. I go back and forth, and we're definitely decadent. So I will talk about that, and I will talk about, because a lot of people ask me, like, what caused the fall? Was it the vaccine? Like, was it Donald Trump? No. It wasn't. I mean, you see a lot today, and it's not necessarily wrong, but you see a lot, like, especially on the manosphere areas, that it was, the fall happened because of values. The values, it was all, yes, there was a lot of licentiousness, and it's kind of crazy to see, and I will indulge myself and ramble here. It's kind of crazy to see how, I don't know if it's promiscuity, but how sexuality and relationships worked then. it now makes a lot of sense why the early Stoic writings, and even Aristotle, and also the early Christian writings, especially like where they kind of stand on sex, is fascinating, because it just seems like it was everywhere there. And to kind of like, no, I'm not, I'm not going to indulge in everything here when it's everywhere, right? I can see why they might have been like, the Stoics can kind of seem like a little bit fuddy-duddy on it. Like you read the Stoics about relationships with women, and it's kind of like that. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Life of Brian, the Monty Python movie, but they have the Protestants and the Catholics, and and the Protestants have had sex twice. Like the Stoics are kind of a little bit like that, and the woman's sitting there like, we can. But now it kind of makes a little bit of sense. And this isn't just men at that time; it's also women too. So obviously there was a difference in relationships then, and so it's fascinating seeing that how that plays out, and also also certain moral ethics, from Aristotle, Plato, and the Epicureans, how that kind of combated it. Then also how the Christians in their various forms, how they started to kind of like, this is crazy. So you guys gotta, let's try to pick one partner versus. So they may have been doing it because like, oh, well, she was married to him and he was married to her, but she was married to him, but then him had to marry her, but then he died and betrothed her to him. So it's just like, oh man, so you're reading the names, you're like, where's this guy? Like this guy is now on his 10th wife or something, so, kind of coming back out of that and back into values. Yes, values definitely were decaying. Absolutely. But it wasn't the sole cause of the fall. It was a solvent. There was multiple things in that fall. I think I heard Victor Davis Hanson said, scholars are kind of thinking it's around, they can count to 270 things, but they, of that caused that fall. But it's not like this and this and this and like a domino effect caused it all. It was just it was so much going on. Values was certainly one thing. But man, there was a lot more than just values, right? Like the instability of governments, the instability of emperors, the instability of economics, the complete loss of patriotism. And also, there was things that were well-intentioned, but they got overzealous. The tragic flaws of man led them, the political animal that man can be, led them to make bad decisions at times. As well-intentioned as they were. And that's just kind of a nature with man. Like someone can be really well-intentioned and do something, but man, it just suddenly messes things up. And and that's something that caused the fall. And then you can kind of like, that is, a lot of things. So I will cover that. I can't detail everything that caused the fall. But I will cover, it wasn't just a pet theory of the manosphere, or it wasn't, it wasn't Abraham Lincoln or something, some weird theory. No, it wasn't George Soros. I mean, to me, it was Sapiens. You've all know Harari caused the fall,
obviously.
But it's just it's a combination of things. So I will cover that, and I will cover those, those musings, and I'll probably will try to talk about the, the beauty of like that last city with like its final stand. They survived, but over time, everything else decayed around them, and then they were lost, which is just crazy. That here goes the one battle. They're going to survive out, and then all of a sudden, the empire, their values and everything else around them just faded out into existence or non-existence.
Yeah, no, that's people are very committed to looking for silver bullet answers for complex socio-economic historical problems. Like, what is the one thing? Well, there is no one thing. There are some factors that are more significant than other ones, for sure. And I do think promiscuity. I do think the sexual revolution was and this is to bring it back around to E. Michael Jones. That's what libido dominandi is about. Is about the consistent use of human sexuality as a wrecking ball that was smashing against the foundations of Western civilization in various ways for 250 years. And the book concludes, like he finished writing it in the late 90s. So the book concludes with the way that pornography is just beginning to merge into American public consciousness. So the Clinton era and all that stuff. And you can just see over the course of the 600 pages, just exquisitely footnoted and everything, just the way that it was used to smash all kinds of values at all different levels between men and women, relationships, children, identity, sexuality, all of it. And yet even still, despite all of that, that was not the one thing, right? Because that's just the context of one book. I mean, you could talk about China. You could talk about, cheap goods manufactured, the crisis of confidence in the late 70s, right? Or you can, go back to World War II and World War I, wiping out 35 million men, how they would have been pretty good fathers probably, right? So, I mean, you can't ever pick one thing.
Right. And it's, like you couldn't say that on like the Roman Empire, you couldn't say that either. Could, like Commodius, it was unfortunate that Marcus Aurelius picked his son over other better options. And Commodius was just, he just turned in on himself and was just indulging in such, sensuality at all corners. Mm-hmm. And even, empresses and stuff like that, they just focused themselves on this thing. And even, Gibbon shows that even at poorer levels, like there was some room to move, there was room to move up in the empire. Thank God we don't live in the Roman Empire. Like people are like, oh, that was a noble time. Like, yeah, but it was
not so much.
Yeah. There's this empire where men would go and they just go into bars and then just or women would go into bars and just leave their children at the side because it was just easier to indulge in these sensualities. Versus, where there was this element of if you were a craftsman or a good soldier, you had some form to rise. It was not, it was very hierarchical and had all types of political things, but they even show there was ability to somewhat gain some sense of footing, and it took work, and there was this idea I'm a Roman, so being a Roman means being strong, being fit in mind, being smart, being X, Y, Z. So I need to be working towards that. And then obviously even Gibbon shows each side, there was the pagans, but pagans had a lot of weird stuff going on. But if they had okay, I'm a Roman, but I have the sun god, make sure so kind of the similar things of, the good parts of Christian ethics where Gibbon says, the Christian ethics did a great job because versus well, this God says this God and that God says this God. So I gotta, it's 4 a.m. So I got to do what this God, it just got so which God do you need to do to get out of bed today? And Gibbon does a good job of kind of showing that, okay, this is so manic, and it was too bad that they didn't listen to the arguments of the Christians of no, you guys got it wrong. It's not a zillion of these guys, but the Christians, could also come on a little bit overbearing too, where they said, where Aristotle has wonderful lessons, but no, he's evil. You had those very early on, no, he's evil too. It's well, wait a second. So then it's just all of a sudden it's a battle. But yeah, I mean, coming back to it, it wasn't just that licentiousness, that was there. The Senate class fell into it, but it wasn't just that caused it to fall. I mean, but the more pervasive it got, the bigger the issue it was. But it wasn't just the soul thing. I think a lot of people, like you said, want that magic bullet of this is it. No, it might have been a solvent in it, but not the whole thing.
Yeah, a solvent is a good word. It was a contributing factor.
Yeah.
Well, cool, man. This has been a crazy adventure through an incredible group of topics that I've just been thrilled to talk with you about. I'm almost tempted to go over to Amazon and pick up Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire right now and catch up with you on your book club. Yeah,
no, I'm not doing the book club, but yeah, it is. I very much do highly recommend it. And I can leave real quick, for the listeners, if they want to read it, Ward Farnes with classical English style will help very much unpack that book. And, if you want a little bit more of a precursor, the letters of Seneca was, especially the ones translated by A.A. Long, try to not to just take the Stoic lessons. He has a lot about Roman life at that particular time. And if you want a more modern writer like Niall Ferguson, you can clearly see the influence of Gibbon on Ferguson. But Ferguson is more modern, so its topics are a little bit more understandable. He had a great book on COVID called Doom. So if you read a little bit of Ferguson, you can go into Gibbon with a little bit of you're able to grasp a little bit of what Gibbon is doing, because Ferguson definitely it takes a lot of great lessons from Gibbon and his writing style. So it makes it a little bit more approachable.
I've been taking notes as we've been chatting. So all of the books that you've mentioned, I'm going to go right over to Amazon and research all of them, but all those will be in the show notes, because I think there were a number of different ones that you said that were intriguing to me, because we all have our literary journeys with the books that we're reading, and why I read a lot of books by my guests and all that stuff. So that takes up a lot of my reading time. But I'm aware, particularly because my Amazon Save for Later card is probably hundreds of books deep at this point. Yeah. I'm aware that there are all these different choose your own adventure journeys through the world of books. So many books, so little time, right?
Yeah, no, I understand that. So I know every time I buy a big pile of books, there's probably like 2 in there that I'll never get to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I don't know which.
Well, thank you so much. Well, I mean, you'll come back to it later until it's just kind of like, well, maybe I should donate this book now. Maybe I'll never read it. Like someone recommended, like Tom Brown's School Days at Oxford was a book from the muscular Christianity era in the early 20th century. And so I bought that, and that's like, it's been sitting on my shelf for a while. I'm like, I'm probably not going to, I opened it up. I'm like, I'm probably not going to read this.
I hear that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Where would you like to send men to find out more about you and what you do?
Yeah, well, no, thank you. This has been an awesome conversation, and it could go on for hours more. JimClair.com is probably the easiest place to find me. I am on Twitter. I think, what was my handle? Find Jim Clair.
Fine. Yeah.
I try to tweet every day. 3 people mention, and to grow my account, which feels like work every day, but I do have a little more fun there. And I show the books I read, and I'm not very active on Instagram, but JimClair.com and Twitter is probably the 2 best places to find me.
You're pretty active on your email list too.
Yeah. So usually about once or twice a month I'm email list, or announce the articles. I get about 1 or 2 a month out. Try to keep a conversation going over there too as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jim. I really appreciate all your wisdom and experience and the generosity that you showed in kind of sharing some of your story for how you got here today.
No, thank you. This has been an absolute blast. I'm honored you asked to have me on here.